And here we go.
Hey,
I bought a farm.
we bought a farm.
So yeah, every once in a while we're starting to get back in the off-season rhythm of these things. We're trying to put them out double this week.
I start feeling the obligation this time of year. We need to do some I bought a farms.
Well, we're actively in the I bought a farm mode, not just from like buying farm, but from like an activity standpoint.
The work's happening right now. I was telling somebody the other day, they're like, dude, how do you make time for all these get the food plots in? I'm like, it's right now. Right now, I've been coordinating, getting seed delivered, getting herbicide, putting the plans together, executing. It happens right now.
Well, it's cool. We talked about getting back to some of our perennial basis with clover and stuff this year. That's taken a huge weight off.
Best thing that I've done in the past
huge
year.
weight off of that. And, obviously we've got summer plannings coming up. We're just talking screening and stuff here pre-podcast. So yeah, I mean, a lot of crazy things kind of happening, and the best time to talk about it is while we're actually doing it. It's hard to think back and all the different steps that we're taking, and it's nope, now is the time.
When it's time to hunt, it's time to hunt. But right now is the work that we're putting in, so that when it comes time to hunt, it just comes down to picking a spot. Yeah.
So we got guests today. We got the man, myth, the legend, new dad, Jeff Sturgis with us. Yeah. And so it'd be cool. Talk to Jeff. Obviously, we'll dive into a lot of the stuff we just talked about. We as HUNTR have got a new relationship with Jen and Jeff with the Pure Wildlife seed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we were talking about just even pre-podcast, getting obviously the clovers and stuff out, and now thinking about the screening aspect of things, and even starting to think ahead towards fall already. So, yeah, I mean, those are the things that, in fact, I've got, I don't know if you saw them up front, those are the new liquid fertilizers.
Saw when I walked in, yeah.
Yeah, so first thing I'm doing, just so everybody doesn't make a mistake, is I've got 50 jars at home. I'm going to do jar tests with clethodim and gly, make sure there's no negative reactions that would clog sprayers.
Okay, or blow up. Right.
And so
was that the
yeah, watch out, Nick. So I'm going to do that, and then kind of have that guide on the website, so that people can go in and be like, can I mix whatever 318 with cleth or with gly or whatever. So we'll have that all laid out.
Sweet.
So yeah, it's that time of year, man. They'll be thinking about all of these things getting put in place.
We need to get a deer grow order in, by the way.
Yeah, I can arrange that.
Yep.
I can arrange.
You know a guy?
Yeah, I know a guy. Okay. I can get that arranged. So yeah, it's nice to be looking at it's April 11th. We're in the heat of the battle at this point. Man.
It's good
in the off season. So
it's good.
It's good. Let's bring Jeff in.
How's it going, guys?
Good, man. We appreciate you coming on. I think Jeff's a regular on the podcast at this point, but this might be the first I bought a farm.
Yeah, it's first I bought a farm, but this is probably your third or fourth time on, right?
Yeah. I don't remember. You guys ask me on, I just come on and we talk about whatever you want to talk about.
So makes it easy.
I thought you knew what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah. No, it makes it easy. Well, the nice thing is, the I Bought a Farm series gives us a really good opportunity to dive in deep on kind of the land management aspect of things if we want to talk about farm acquisitions and stuff. But really at this time of the year in April, it's the planning and preparation and execution of so many different things from now through the end of summer that really prepare for the success we're going to see in the fall, hopefully.
And whether it was at the origin of I Bought a Farm or not, we have bought a farm together in the midst of that. So, I mean, a lot of the aspects of, of covering pursuit of and purchasing, whether it's the financial aspect or, now that you've got one, you got to turn it into something. That's a big part of it as well.
Yeah. And I remember talking about it.
Yeah.
You're talking about the Illinois property, right?
I know. Cause you wanted to buy the neighboring piece, or you're like, let me know if something comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. That's,
which we're still looking for you.
We're not at that point yet, but it's kind of the bad thing is when you buy too much around home.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, you have a neighbor that comes, we have our home here. We're not moving. It's kind of like you can buy and hold property, but if you never plan to sell it, you really never make money on it. For the most part.
Yeah.
It's not like we're buying to sell it because we live here. So I would love to own land, a little chunk in Wisconsin. Western Illinois is awesome. We're so close to Iowa.
Right.
But yeah, it's someday down where you guys are at, that's a beautiful area.
Yeah. Well, it does make it difficult. You talk about the neighbor thing. I had a couple discussions with people here even just recently talking to us about land acquisitions and stuff. And, essentially saying like, man, my neighbor wants to sell me this property, but it's too much. And the reality is your neighbor's property is going to be worth more to you than it is anyone else. If you want it bad enough, it's like,
and your neighbor knows that too.
Your neighbor knows that too, and they're going to take the one I bought in Ohio. They knew.
We need to write our neighbor back, by the way.
Yeah,
we got a neighbor trying to buy some of our Illinois.
Yeah, he wants to buy something, but it just is the reality of it. And I recently went through and bought a piece in Ohio against my property that was substantially more than I would have paid for normally in that area. But it's like, man, do I really want somebody occupying this 50 acres in between my 200? No, like it's going to be a thorn in my side.
Right. Yeah, we've been fortunate here because the pieces we picked up outside of the original portion we bought, one eliminated 5 or 6 hunters.
Yeah, there you go.
And then another one, it was only 10 acres, but it eliminated 1 to 2 hunters.
Yep.
So it's kind of, those are more high priority pieces as far as hunters go. There might be better ones those are actually pretty good for habitat wise, but there might be better ones for deer strategy wise, but
sure.
They were deer strategy as far as fewer hunters in the area.
Major impact.
Yeah.
Also access. So access, one of them.
Definitely.
Both of them together gave us really good access.
Dude, access from neighboring parcels is like one of the most, because it's just never going to happen unless you buy it, but it's one of the most overlooked things. And fortunately, it's like my uncle owns a bunch of stuff that borders us, and it's not currently getting hunted because they're looking at it for solar panel leases and stuff like that. But in the meantime, we can access our property now from like a much broader perspective than, because he used to lease it through like base camp leasing and stuff. And now all of a sudden I'm like, I have all these new stand options just because I can access it from a certain direction.
Yeah. Isn't that awesome?
It's huge. I mean, well, we talk about like our Illinois piece. Our neighbor wants to buy what's, I think, 16 acres. He thinks it's 10, but it's 16 acres. But that has the only critical east access that we have on the entire property.
Have to have it, yeah.
And so it's like, we can build in things. He was saying like we could have the bow hunting rights to it, but it's like, man, once you give up that ownership, nothing's guaranteed at that point.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's tough.
That's a tough one. Yeah, a lot of times when I'm looking at client properties, you're assessing, where is your actual access? Where can you get in? And obviously there's the front road where they come in the driveway, but sometimes there's an obscure easement that goes through a neighbor's fence row. And they'll say, well, yeah, we do have this, but we have to take a row of corn out if we use that, and the farmer's not happy. And I'm like, but man, that gets you to the back of your property, the opposite side, and you guys own that easement. I would take advantage of that. Or they say, well, we could plan on going through the neighbors, and that's always a big tough discussion, because you could plan everything around that access and the one on the other side, and now you lose that because offshoot relatives comes in, wants to hunt, and realize this is hurting their hunting, or God forbid they pass away, you can't afford it, then you lose your access, and that could drastically change how you use the property. So I always look at what's the dependable access, what can you count on, what's legal, and if not, maybe you could buy it. We talk about first right of refusals. There's a lot of different ways to prep a neighbor to thinking that not only they say something is going to be done, or they'll give it to you when they pass away or they move on, but let's get it in writing, and I'll pay you to do that too.
The access through a neighbor's piece is such a double-edged sword, because I've looked at that many times and been like, boy, we would really benefit from having that.
Like by permission.
By permission. But the double-edged sword of that is like, they're like, well, yeah, that's fine. Can we access across this part of yours? And I'm like, well, no.
It's like any favor.
Yeah, you got to be willing to scratch their back too.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part. And, I would say even when I started looking at properties, like access probably wasn't the first thing on my mind, when it, in reality, it definitely needs to be up there, if not at the top. I mean, the fact is you could have a great property, but if you can't access it appropriately, you're in trouble.
Well, dude, our Illinois farm's a good example. I mean, I can't say for sure, but like, we may not have bought it if not for that easement that's on the eastern side.
Everything else is westerly access.
All western access. Yeah. And it's like, so Jeff, you've seen maps, we'll show you again, but like the way that farm sets up is the homestead, or the home on it, is in the west central part of the property, And we use that to our advantage because we can stack all the food right around it and use the home activity, right, to just bounce off real quick for a few couple options, and then we can north and south border lines. But as far as hunting the back end of the property and like catching them coming back in the morning and like getting in close on some of that secluded bedding, that easement is our only option.
Yeah, to slip in behind them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we are using because it's blocky and it's open, like we have north-south lines that we are using now as well, still coming in from the west, but getting above or below the entire property. But yeah, I mean, it's tough to see that.
And that's where, you know, access is always, and I think some people just almost forget about access. Everyone talks about it, but not everyone follows access rules to where they're not spooking deer. But that's why when we meet with a client too, a big portion of the morning for an hour and a half, we discuss where food sources can go and where food plots can go, because food determines where access can go. Access determines where food can go. They both go hand in hand. So if you put food in the wrong spot, you just destroyed your access.
Yeah.
And so food can be used. It's not just holding deer in a certain spot and hunting over it. It's food's used to determine how you can access. And so if your food's, and a lot of times that means you might have to shrink your food down, eliminate food, cut it in half, screen it better. And those are hard conversations we have with clients too, where, you know, you're going to have to cut that food plot in half so you can double that screening so you can actually get by it without spooking deer, or you're going to have to get rid of that food plot. I know it's pretty.
Yeah.
But, you know, back in the day, they talked about grab a soil map, see where your best soil is, and plant a food plot. And that's no different than saying I like white pine, so I'm just going to go put a great tree stand in every white pine on the property.
Right.
Because I like that tree.
Yeah.
So
I really like that.
So critical.
I really like that conversation about access and also specifically size of food sources.
Right.
I told you that I mentioned earlier, like, so Brackett lives nearby to like this Illinois piece. And so he's like, his insight on the local area. So I'm like, we're bouncing ideas off each other. And I think he has some really good insight on some stuff that I bet you'll agree with. I think this is very similar to your strategy and I just mentioned a minute ago, is we make a pretty concerted effort to stack as much big, just literally in terms of the size of the food source. You know, we keep it all together as much as possible and put it kind of in like a centralized location, and then branching out from there, having smaller hunting size food plots. And I don't know exactly what the number is in terms of like percentage of the acre or how much, but like initially on some of our hunting plots, you know, I got them 1.5 acres.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Chris looked at those and was like, too big. Take 2/3 of it and move it towards the central feeding area, and just have a smaller location on the way back. And I'm like, yeah, that probably makes a lot of sense, because I don't want them there when I'm coming and going. Like, I don't want that. I don't want to try to walk into a central food source in the morning or get out of it in the evening. I want them to move through it and onto the main deal.
Yeah. And to me, a true hunting plot is 1/4 of an acre or less.
Yep.
And that's it. And so like a holding plot, you look at if a deer's going to hold there all afternoon until dark, that's a holding plot. And where a hunting plot is just a pass through. So like out here, the only clover we have planted is on our hunting plots, because we want the deer to just pass through. We want them to get to something better, something more diverse, something more valuable. So that's where they'll stack up. So where I shot the 6-year-old buck last year that I was after, he was going through a true hunting plot, made a scrape, just walking through. I don't even know if he's going to take a bite. He just was walking through it. He's looking for does, and he's just going on to the big food plots, and that's where he'd actually feed. He's just moving through it. So, and I like the clover because it establishes a pattern of use on that plot, that hunting plot during the summer. So even if it goes down to nothing by middle of October, it's still established that pattern that they're using. It's a part of their daily pattern on the way to something bigger, and they tend to still go through it like Bo did last year.
Yeah. But that's not to say you'll still hunt a brassica plot or a grain plot, right?
We do, like the big plots. I determine it by if I can't get on or off that plot without spooking deer, then I would never hunt it.
Yeah, that's fair.
So if I can, I'm looking at like 1 acre plot, and those deer are holding till dark. It's nearly impossible to get on and off. Now we'll hunt those plots like, you have a small plot here, a 1/4 acre plot, you can shoot with a bow. And then that plot over there that's 2 acres starts at 70 yards, and I get in and out of the blind without spooking deer on either, for the most part. The small one because they're just passing through, the big one because I'm far enough to get on and out and in and out of that blind without spooking them. So that's in those little plots, sometimes if they're maybe a 1/2 acre, then I would have it stripped out and brassica on one side, a green blend on the other, something like that. But
something so they're not evenly dispersed across that entire plot then usually? Right,
yeah. More like I'll cut it 1/2 and 1/2 running lengthwise.
Got it.
So the way you want the deer to travel, some will look at it like, well, let's say we'll put clover here, beans here, corn here, and that's the way you want the deer to move. Well, what if they're not eating corn in early October? So then instead of moving through the intended use, they just stop in the green, they never come through. So if your stand positions are such that you have to rely on them going through every one of those, where if it's side by side, they just keep moving through the direction you want to. They can be not on either side of that line and just keep moving the direction you want them to move on.
So let me ask you this, because this is where my next question comes, is like a lot of times guys will plant, myself included, you'll just plant the available acreage, so it's like if at the back of a field, back cove there, we have a food plot called the Cove. It's 1.5 acres, right? And I'm thinking it's potentially too big. We want it to be more of a pass-through plot. I don't know. Jeremy, I got to still figure that out. But so how do you take 1.5 acre opening and turn that into just like let's even call it a 3/4 acre food plot that still makes sense? Like, do you just buffer it with switch all the way?
It depends, because on one side you want let's say it's 1.5 acres and you're shrinking it down to a 1/2 acre. And you can take that acre because it goes against your cover and convert it into bedding cover. So you might want to outline that area and switch, a few pockets of switch in between, and then let the rest go into early successional growth. So you have that diversity that'll hold some does and fawns. And then that takes does and fawns out of your woods right next to it. And then that gives more room in the woods for bucks. So it really depends on so let's say you have an 80 acre parcel, and it's a normal rectangle, 1/2 mile deep. And in the front of it, you have 8 acres of food. And that 80 acres of food stretches 150 to 200 yards into your 80 acres. Well, by the time you get 880 yards back to the back of that 80, those deer aren't necessarily supported by that food that you have 600 yards towards the front. That's a long way for them to travel on a daily basis. A lot of times they don't make that movement. So those deer in the back that are in your bedding area, you might find are moving to your neighbor's food sources.
Right.
So going back to every acre needs to be supported by some kind of food. So then you'd want maybe a 2 acre food plot off to the side of that back 40. So that back 40 was sufficiently supported with a holding plot that would actually hold deer in those bedding areas. Because if you don't have, so that kind of gets back to your question of it's 1.5 acres. Well, if that's supporting 30, 40 acres, well, then you might need that 1.5 acres or 20 acres. And you have that depth right there where a 1/4 acre wouldn't be enough.
Yeah, and see where that one's located, we would be fine because we're going to have a destination grain field 200 yards away.
Yep.
So then it becomes just a pass-through.
Essentially a staging plot.
Yeah.
Are you with me on that? Mm-hmm. You like that?
Mm-hmm. I assume you're talking about putting it up towards the mouth, not towards the back. Like
I'm talking about having it run the length.
Mm-hmm.
And then some CRP maybe on the sides and the early successional stuff. The rest of it, we're going to take a move to the other side of the timber finger, butting up to the community scrape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know where you're at. I gotcha.
Another thing too with those guys, like let's say you have those, so you have the grain field and then you have that one. So let's say you have 2 holding plots, meaning the deer hold dark and they leave. Usually when they leave, they're not going to the next food plot down the road. They're going out to the ag fields. They like open, big, social, dark. So if you have 2 holding plots there, you're really not managing their time much. I mean, what I mean by that is a mature buck, if he's in his bedding and he goes through that small hunting plot, on the way to the holding plot, you just manage his entire afternoon during the daylight.
Right.
Whereas if he goes to that holding plot and just passes through, his next step is onto your neighbors. Typically, he's not going to go to another holding plot 200 yards away. He's going to that one. That's where he feels comfortable. Another mature buck might be on that other holding plot. And that's why it's so critical that all those food plots, like out here, with the exception of our hunting plots, everything's planted in the same combination. We have 5 that have corn in them because they're that much bigger. So once we get to 2 acres, acre and a half, then half of that might be in corn. We still have the same green blends on all of them. So there's no reason for bucks to be in one spot versus another.
I gotta say, as time goes on, I struggled for years to understand fully Sturgis's like the ring theory. Mm-hmm. We both did. I think there was parts of it that I'm like, okay, I can see how that would translate, but like, I'm getting it now. Does that make sense? Because like what you just said, there's no sense to decrease the size of our plot that I'm talking about if there is no destination plot also within our control.
Right.
Because then you need a destination plot. You need something to hold them. Yeah. But
and then add a ring plot then.
That's off right.
To the sides.
Well, and so to expand even further, I have considered even cutting our holding plot in half. Not in the amount that gets planted, but in the amount that gets harvested. So harvest half of that one and harvest half of the other one that's further down, and then have a duplicate scenario. So now you've got multiple
2 holding plots.
What do you call those? Like, I've got a whole ecosystem working together here. I've got, bedding, pass-through plot, destination plot, destination plot, pass-through plot, bedding. We can recreate that, I think, 3 or 4 times on our property.
You'll have different lines of movement then too. So then
for sure,
you'll find a mature buck takes over this line, another mature buck takes over this line. But if you're trying to jam them into the same movement,
exactly,
they can come in from different directions. That's okay.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes you'll take a 2 acre area that they can plant, and you plant an acre holding plot off to one side, 1.25 acres at the most. And then on the other side of that, up against the cover where you expect them to move out of bedding, you just create a little 1/8 of an acre, 1/4 acre pass through that's surrounded by switch, and there's a big barrier between there and the holding plot. It's almost and so that way that buck will go through that little spot. It's an area you can get in and out without spooking deer off the holding plot, but you can shoot the holding plot with a gun. So in that stand, it's a super stand. You can hunt here for bow, and then over there you can still shoot 100 yards and hit that whole holding plot with a gun if you want to hunt gun.
I think this is maybe kind of what you're saying, but like, does it make sense to, if you have a big enough destination food source, essentially, so in my case, 12 acres, and I've got cover on 3 distinct, sides of that. It's not a line by any means, but it's like they're coming down a drainage from one, they're coming off a hill from another, they're coming out of a big pocket from the third. It seems like there could be 3 distinct lines of movement, as you're calling it, or ecosystems, like I was calling it earlier. And I could back away from those pass-through plots in each of those 3 directions. So we've got the log pile.
Even right on the corner. Oh, well, you're saying just based on your other one, like log pile and stuff.
Get a log pile on one, get the east twin on the other, and then right below where we just did some of that burning, I would have like a third. So there's 3 paths of movement coming into that.
And that's why I think it's so critical when you have water holes, you separate those two, because then that just adds to the time management.
Jeff, we got to talk water holes today. I'm going to send Dad out to get some bed night today. Sorry.
But it's then you have bedding area, water hole, small plot, or bedding area, small plot, water hole, and then holding plot.
Yeah.
So you're trying to create that line of movement. In a water hole is a all day low risk stand location. A mature buck will come into a water hole. It doesn't matter if it's 9 a.m, 3 p.m, midnight, middle of the day. He doesn't care. It's low risk. He's there for a minute or two. It's back in the cover, and he just slips through. A food source, even under the best circumstances, maybe a buck will go through there during the morning, during the rut sometime. But generally, if a buck goes through there, it's afternoon sometime because of the risk factor. It's a risk factor. So if you take that water hole that's low risk, add it to the food plot brings up the risk of the water hole, not the other way around. Right. So you just took a great all-day stand location and ruined it by putting it on a hunting plot.
So Jeff,
you definitely want to keep those separate.
So let's kind of break that down, because I know at least in some of my situations, and probably a lot of people listening, even in some of your cases, if you've got these, let's call them more holding size plots, those 1 to even 3 acre type plots. And like in a lot of my ground, it's timber, right? So it's a 3 acre plot or 2 acre plot, and then it's timber. Are you saying that you could cut your hunting plot out of that bigger holding plot and just screen it appropriately around it?
Yes, and depending on the situation.
Okay.
So it's hard when it's a big square and it's surrounded on three sides by cover, like a big U.
Yep.
Because then it's almost like, well, yeah, if the deer are coming out of this front side over to I'm looking at it like you're looking into the U. So regardless of actual compass direction, you're looking into that U, and maybe there's a really good bedding area off to the right. Well, then you could create a small plot in that corner of the field, give yourself 30 feet of switchgrass between there and the big field. And then you have a water hole in the woods, 100 yards, 75 yards. And now you're making all those connections where not only do you have a bedding area, you have the small hunting plot, but you're putting a water hole in between. So that's even one more reason for that buck to come out of that bedding area, hit the water, hit the small plot, and so it's not just you're controlling his direction, but you're controlling his time. So during the daylight, he really doesn't have much time by the time he gets out of his bed, it's not like he's getting out at 1 o'clock.
Right.
And he ends up holding plot at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. This is like a 5 to 6 type movement where he's getting out, hitting the water, hitting the small plot, and then he might hit the holding plot right at dark, or maybe not at all.
Doesn't that all of a sudden make a lot more sense to you than for some reason it used to? So here's a question. How do you think mature bucks, if I've got one in my scenario coming from 3 different directions, when they get and they all meet in the middle at this big destination field, do you think they kind of stick to their end of the field? Do you think they just kind of see the other and give each other space? How do you think they act in a big social environment like that?
I think that's such a personality thing.
Yeah.
I think because I can imagine some of those bucks, there could be one that just sits back in the woods until another one leaves.
Right.
And then there's another one that charges right in and he can really care less. And then there's 2 maybe that get along, and one's over on that side, one's over on that side. As long as they're not, 50 yards apart, they're fine.
Well, it's funny because in my situation there, it's big enough that they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know until they were they met in the middle of this destination food source.
And then
there's a little crown. So you have one on one side and one on the other side. And so it's just a little slight elevation change. It can matter. And that's where it goes back. We were talking before we started. I've seen people kind of in that same scenario. Well, we have an acre food plot. Let's crisscross it and grid pattern it in 10 little pieces of 1/10 of an acre food plots. And in that case, I think it's so confining, they don't want to go into it. But the whole concept is that they can't see each other, so you can fit more mature bucks in one area.
Yeah, I don't think I would. I mean, depending on the height of the wall, I wouldn't. They don't like that. Who were we just talking to? That they're you talk about a wall confining their. Madison.
Madison, yeah.
Yeah, and I would agree with his assessment.
In terms of the timber windrows and stuff?
Whether it's timber or you're planting giant miscanthus, they don't like. If you have a food plot and you wrap it all the way with a screen and there's 2 openings, in theory, you're like, oh, it's great. They're going to come and go.
They feel like they're in a dome of death.
Terrible. I've seen that so many times in properties with dozing food plots. So you doze the food plots out, windrow all the way around with the debris and leave a couple openings. And I've literally had clients that have the mature bucks are not going there, but they know there's mature bucks in the land. They put a camera on the outside, and the mature buck goes around it.
Yeah.
He just never goes through. It's just too confining for him. Yeah. And does and fawns, they're used to living in confining. I mean, the higher the stem count, the higher the fawn survival rate. It breaks scent dispersion. They can't find predators, can't find the fawns. But when it comes to mature bucks, they don't necessarily live their lives in thick cover all the time. I mean, look at all summer. They're out in the open somewhere. They crush their velvet in. So at some point, it just becomes way too confining for them. Where a doe and fawn might be able, they maze in there. I mean, look at some of those clear cuts on public land in Ohio where I used to hunt down there. And you can see does and fawns going over in there, but you don't want to shoot the buck that can actually live in there. Too small of a rack.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd probably be this little yearling that goes in there. That's about it.
Well, alternatively to a big screen funneling and stuff, I've been watching some of your stuff recently here about fallen trees and using that, just to create divert movement and stuff, to the point where, when I go hang stands anymore, this time of year, obviously past the summer stuff, I don't mess with it. I bring a chainsaw with me.
Yeah,
I bring a chainsaw, and I'm like, I know roughly where it's going and stuff, and I'm like, I'm going to take a big walk around, a 100 yard walk around this, and make sure any tree that I can cut to derail movement, to put it in my favor and keep them from a downwind stuff, I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're going to avoid it.
They have to. Well, they can't go through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you kind of make it look natural. Like even one of the areas we created a travel corridor for a specific stand location and bedding, both sides of a hilltop, and then you blow your scent to the open side. It's actually snake management area, goat prairie. So you blow your scent towards that direction. But the opening we left between all the aspen, we left aspen standing in the middle, put a mock scrape there with a camera, and then we pushed all the aspen this way, cut it all. So it all went to one side and cut it all to the other. But we left probably a 20-yard opening through that. And so even then, if you made a 10-foot wide opening or even 20 feet, I think at some point it's just too confining for them. They don't like it.
And you're staggering them, right? So it's not like a solid wall of anything. It's just,
we have a pretty good solid wall, but it's they're 20 yards apart. Okay. And then all that regeneration from the aspen you did cut down, all those clips are still interspersing. So through that area, it's just thousands of shoots of aspen regenerating, even in the 20 yards of aspen we left. So it's super thick. I think everything just blends in. You can imagine how thick it is around the aspen we cut down.
Oh yeah.
It's grouse in there now. It's beautiful. So that's our thing too. I mean, out here, a grouse or pheasant or turkeys. I had my sweatshirt. I got baby juice on my sweatshirt right here from a little spit up.
Not that kind of baby juice, Nick.
Yeah, not that kind of juice. I had some guys I know, they were dropping off a couple telephone poles for kestrel boxes. And the kestrels are pretty cool. They're on the population's on the decline, but we have kestrels around here on wire, so we're adding a couple boxes to the property. It's just kind of cool to one of these changes you can make. It's like, oh, cool, we could help the kestrel population. Let's do that. Or we can. Our turkey populations have exploded. We've had an explosion in pheasant population. It's just it's fun. All these things you do. There's always other wildlife species that you can explode at the same time, which is a lot of fun.
You talk about
talk about whitetail all the time because that's my love. But there's all these other little pieces that are so much fun.
You talk about those walls and stuff. Like one of the things that I've been doing and will continue to do is like that entire Ohio property's been select cut. So I'm actually going against a lot of my plots and stuff, and I'm cutting more openings because there is walls in certain places where it's like, man, if I'm going to funnel them, I don't want them to be funneled here rather than be funneled down there. So I'm cutting, it's firewood too, which I need, but I'm cutting those open and, areas. So basically I can allow more movement and flow through to the new plots that we establish and stuff. But, I brought up the bigger plot situation because in a lot of places like this new Ohio farm, we just put in 5 acres of plots, which was basically 4 plots up on the ridge. And then what was my main access in the bottom was also my only food, which was completely detrimental to how I hunted the property. Now I can kind of leave that alone because I've got a perimeter road. But you've got only, certain areas that you can really work with from a food standpoint. So it's kind of figuring out those strategies to create those, hunting plot scenarios with those kind of holding plot scenarios. And sometimes that is going to be the all in one area. So, being able to, we talked about the screening, the deer fence earlier, using that to kind of break those plots up as much as you can or switch.
Well, see, and I like switch for your situation better. I mean, I think Jeff will agree because the height has something to do with it. The taller, the scarier.
Yeah, they don't like that.
I think. Yeah, I mean, if you just have like a 6-foot barrier, I think they're more willing to tolerate that. Maybe not in a total enclosed situation, but where you're just trying to box off.
Yeah, no dome of death.
No dome of death. But if you're just trying to box off like or seclude a corner, that has a broad opening still through it, I personally would prefer switch to like a miscanthus or an Egyptian.
Well, even like a kind of imagine an upland setting would almost be the best, where you have some shrubs, some grasses, some briars, and there's this little food plot kind of hidden in there, and then you have the big plot off the side. It's just more natural for them coming through. I'm not saying all switchgrass is bad, but that's the choice that people have sometimes, especially when they're looking at old field conversion or taking an ag field and converting it. Sometimes you have to think about, what are we going to do with this in 10 years? Are we going to convert it back to ag? And of course, if you're planting a bunch of trees, it makes it a lot more problematic to do so. You have to be careful on some of the annual screenings too. There's some out there that will get 14, 15 foot high and the seed heads up top, and that's where the leaf structure is. But at that 6, 7 foot range, 5 foot, 4 foot and down, you can just look right through them like cane poles. And so that's not necessarily a good thing either, where they'll grow 17 feet tall, but if all the cover is like at 8 feet and above, and you can look 200 yards out into the ag field on a 12-foot wide screening, then that's not a good thing either.
Yeah, that's not good. Interesting. Yeah, I mean that concept of breakup, I think, is you know, and I would say it's because most people are dealing with populations of too many deer, and so the thought process is like, okay, I planted this half-acre plot, it got mowed, right? I need more space, I need more food, and so the common thought process is expand the plot, right? And now you've got an 1.5 acre plot that you're doing, but you're hunting that 1.5 acre plot the same way you hunted it as a half acre.
Right. Well, and you always have to consider too, wherever you put food, and even a 1/4 acre plot will displace buck bedding. So you put a 2 acre plot, and typically a mature buck won't bed within 200 yards of that. And so if you take a 40 acre parcel and put a 5 acre parcel in the middle, and you have true 4 or 5 year old bucks in the area, you probably made it so that none of those will bed on your property. Whereas if you put that 5 acre plot off to one corner, then you still have enough depth left over for your land to house a mature buck. So I've been to a 400 acre parcel in southern Michigan in Jackson area, and they had about 30 acres of food plots, and you couldn't go 100 yards on that property without going into the next food plot. And all the mature bucks would get to 2, 3, they pass them up, and then the neighbor a mile or two away is shooting them at 185 when they're 5 years old. And they wondered where they went.
Wow.
It's because they grew out of the reclusiveness level that they need. There was too much food, too many does, and either one, the buck's going to be gone. And if he's gone and not living on your property because of a condition, whether it's hunting pressure, too many does, not the right food, then why is he going to come back during the rut? He's already established his residency for the fall somewhere else. A lot of people think, well, he'll be back during the rut. He might be for a day or two, but do you want to bank on a day or two, or do you want to bank on 70 days?
Boy, doesn't that sound like a pretty direct diagnosis of my farm? Yeah, that's what was happening. Huh? And
that's a different, that's a different concept altogether. And that's why, like here, we have 1.5 acres of clover out of 17.5 acres of food plots.
Wow.
I don't, and that's why during the fall we have 20, 25 does and fawns scattered through all our 17.5 acres of plots, but we get pictures of 45 different bucks. And that's kind of the ratio you want. What I see on high-end properties that are designed well and habitat wise, they're, where they should be, is that whatever number of does and fawns you should have more bucks that you get pictures of during the entire season. And of course your buck population is reflective of an area 5 times probably greater than the does and fawns.
Right.
So those does and fawns are homebodies. They're there all the time. The buck's more of a snapshot of the neighborhood. But then you go to properties where I'll see people that have 50 does and fawns, and they're getting pictures of 20, 25 bucks. That's really bad. That means that you can count on those older bucks not being there for the bulk of the year. They might come in for the rut a little bit, but so that goes back into the first way to eliminate doe population is to eliminate summer food. So we just don't have summer food to begin with because I don't want to create a problem.
That's that's the point that I'm having the most difficulty with this year.
Were you like, I was like, offended is the wrong word, but it's funny to use. Be like, what do you mean I shouldn't plant beans?
Well, yeah, to a point. And here's why. And I understand the where and the whens of planting beans. My Kentucky property has been the mysterious one to me, right? I put I planted corn, and I planted a lot of brassicas and some rye and some winter wheat, and then I ended up planting some clover here and alfalfa recently. But I basically took an old cattle pasture and I turned it into 14 acres of food.
Surrounded by big timber.
It was surrounded by giant mountain timber. I mean, Daniel Boone National Forest.
Oh yeah.
And again, it's Eastern Kentucky, so take it for what it's worth. But that county only harvested reportedly 129 bucks last year, the whole county. Whereas neighboring counties are shooting 2,000. So the deer density in that area, in as justified by my cameras and hunting, is very low. Now there are some giant bucks in those mountains, like old monsters. And so, my kind of struggle this year and thought process is like, unlike my other farms, I feel like I actually have to try to increase the population on that farm. Like I might need to plant summer food to increase it because there is.
To me, like the the most powerful summer food is are beans. And that's the best herd building planting you could have. But you still have to have greens because, well, in an area like that, even with low deer numbers, it could be high browse pressure on the food plots because it's only game in town. So like in the UP in Michigan was that. They would hammer that food. It didn't matter what I planted just because there was no
the only food.
They didn't have ag fields, mass crop, anything.
Did your stuff get pounded?
No. But we also had a really big acorn year this year.
It's true.
But see, I would go more towards making sure in that case, like if you were a client, I was going to the property, I would look at a strong representation of summer food. So that, like, best would be half beans because then that establishes a pattern of use. Every deer that comes through there during the summertime, for whatever reason, they find that food. You'll hold those does and fawns. You'll start to build a population. In the UP of Michigan, I did it with all clover. So at sometimes 8.5 acres out of 8.5 acres was all clover in the summertime. And then I'd convert that. And I was always planting cool season annuals with a clover base. So I'd have clover the following summer to help build the herd. But then I had that cool season annual converted into the fall. So it was, but on that property, you'd want to increase. And if you had large enough food plots, then I'd go with beans on 50% probably of everything. And so let's say you had 8 acres. I'd want to see at least 4 acres of beans, maybe 5, maybe 6. And then plan on greens, like heavy fall greens for that fall, because that establishes a pattern of use on the early season beans. Then they switch over to the greens, then they switch over to the bulbs, then they switch back to the beans.
And that's
still standing in season.
That's a great example of like what you're kind of describing earlier, where you have a primary destination source, which is your beans.
And carving out a greens hunting plot on the way to those,
or a few of them.
Like on depending on where where the hunting access is.
Well, between the destination source and the bedding, in a way that has access.
Well, I wouldn't want an all bean field. Like I'd want something else on that field. That's not enough diversity. So, what if they don't want to eat it like around here, they don't eat the beans when they turn brown. We don't have too high of deer numbers.
Right.
So in areas where there's high deer densities, they'll eat the beans in October, November. It doesn't matter if they're brown or mature or not, they eat them. But when you have low deer density areas, you're on the fence whether they eat them or not. And so in that area, because they don't have other complementary food sources, they might. But what happens if they don't? Now you have a standing bean field that you're anchoring plot for the entire movement of the property, and it's not attracting deer in October, November.
Right.
Great if it does in December, but now you're hitting leftover deer.
Yeah, which I don't want to do. So in that scenario, and I don't mind doing it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I kind of thought that too, Jeff, about as far as the attractiveness of stuff. And I think that's probably a lot of people have that I did about clover for sure. I'm like, when do they eat it? I felt the same way about beans. I was like, because for a long time I was like, well, they'll eat the greens and then they won't hit them for a while, for however long, until it gets cold and everything else is gone. So then, like, I don't know, December, they start hitting it again, like after the
crushing the pods.
On our farm, I have not experienced that. Like this past year, it seemed like it was an anchor like all the way through. Like, yeah, we had deer there during the summer, but there's bean fields everywhere. So like it was just one of many.
Yeah.
And then I had really consistent deer movement, off of like primary scrapes and stuff and food plots that were satelliting that.
Yeah.
In October, almost more than anything. It seemed like
you have high deer numbers, right?
We do.
Yeah. And so that's different because then they'll just keep eating. I go to a lot of client parcels where they have big deer numbers, big bean plots, and they'll hit them all season long because there's so many deer. But like around here, the neighbor, he's going to be disking in all his beans from last year because we didn't have a cold enough winter for them to even want to come back on the beans.
Well, that made me feel good here recently is that I watched that pretty closely this past year. So I planted 10.5 acres and it held beans and deer all the way through. I mean, they didn't crush it in January and February like you'd think.
Because we didn't have cold weather.
Because we didn't have the weather. Right. And I think I can pack a little more density into it. So I'm going to plant 12 acres worth of beans into 10.5 acres this year. But by the time March rolled around, I mean, I monitored it. I'd go out once a month or whatever. And all the way through, I had bean pods right until about March. March, or just like within the past couple of weeks here, I'm like, okay, they're gone. That's it. They're gone. And that made me feel really good. I'm like, man, that was like the perfect size. Like I had just the right amount of food for the deer that we have here.
Well, the biggest test of all though is October, November, but especially November and December, but November being the middle point. What percentage of the area mature bucks did you have using that property on a daily basis? And so if you had the majority of the mature bucks in the area anchoring on your property the majority of the time, then what you're doing is, I mean, that's the whole trick of food plotting.
Right.
That's when I go to eight properties in 9 days in Southeast Ohio or Michigan or Wisconsin, Minnesota. The whole trick is, every one of those might be a different food plot program.
Yeah.
Based on the size, the equipment, the ground that they have to work with, their neighboring food sources. There's so many different, the number of deer. So you can go to 8 different properties and have eight different food plot prescriptions. And so that's kind of what you're always looking at. How am I doing in November compared to everybody else? You want consistency.
I know, Jeff, you always talk about being the herd influencer and obviously looking at that. It seems like, some sort of greens type plot in the fall is like, it's the foolproof, right? I mean, like the reality is that's what's going to influence the herd in October, November. Like they're going to be there.
Right. Yeah, that's the base. I look at a food plot pyramid and that greens are on the bottom, and then I look at corn and then beans or some type of summer food. But that's not the same for every property though. Like you go to places like, let's say someone has 2 acres in a wooded area in northern Wisconsin, Michigan, upstate New York, even areas of Pennsylvania. And if you only have 2 acres and you plant brassica and you have moderate deer numbers, they might have that down to the dirt by sometime in October, early October.
They did this year. Yeah.
So like brassica beans are, if you have high deer numbers, beans are not very browse resistant.
Right.
Brassica is almost as bad. Clover's right up there. Layered rye.
Mm-hmm. You think clover is right up there?
Yeah, clover is down to look at it this way. In the UP of Michigan, I planted clover on my trails where I was accessing for hunting stands starting October 1st because I could count on deer not being in those areas because the clover was down to the dirt already.
Wow.
So I used clover in areas I was literally walking on so I could count on no deer.
That's crazy. I wouldn't have thought that. I mean, I typically look at clover as a pretty browse tolerant. I
think, again, it comes probably down to the density and then what other food sources around. Because, like, if you look at clover, especially in, like, that, I always think of clover besides the spring, like, in that September time period of where it's, like, cooler temperatures, that's actively growing, but you're offset by all of the agricultural usually around you. When that ag goes down, the clover goes down. Like, it's in tandem.
Try that clover, like you put that clover in a big wood setting in Kentucky.
Yeah, I am.
Clover.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's if it's all clover, it's gone. But there's another thing too. Like when you get down to Kentucky, West Virginia, Southern Illinois, Southern Indiana, Southern Ohio, and Tennessee, well, then you get clover growing later into the season too. Like up in the UP of Michigan where I was at, we get our first frost early September. And you're getting your first snow by the 3rd week of September. It's not growing anymore. So every bite is not replaced. And if it's the only food in town,
it's gone.
It gets eaten down. And that's where like rye, you could layer rye, and that way you're trying to build a sod base. So you had older rye, middle rye, and young rye down at the bottom. They tend to eat through it. You're trying to just give yourself a thick base. It's not a glamour crop. It's not very high on preference, but if it's only thing green and available for them, then it's high on preference and attraction.
You'd be proud of us, Jeff. We killed a big 4-year-old on a rye plot this year in Ohio. As my first rye plot, I think.
Every one of our bucks that we killed in Illinois were on some sort of plot with rye in them.
Well, we put rye in every plot, so.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean,
it's hard to lose when you're shooting every one. You miss 1,000% of the shots you'd ever take.
It's a tough road with food plots and what to plant because for one, everyone wants to plant the glamour crops and they see what's advertised by this or that and it gets you excited to plant. But I have to give people realistic planting prescriptions. And we'll even tell people because we sell buckwheat, we sell rye, but we'll tell people just go down to the feed mill and buy it.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper buying it bulk in those locations. But the point is I might recommend a combination to a client that doesn't even involve one of our food plot blends.
Mm-hmm. Just because it's the right
they
one.
need rye, they need heavy peas, they need heavy oats, they need to have that combination. That's what's going to work best for them in their moderate deer density, big woods area with small plots. I want them to have something realistic. So I kind of get paid to be right, or try to be right as much as I can.
Yeah.
And when you go, it's like you have to consider the deer numbers, kind of like what we've been talking about, like Kentucky property, Jeremy property, your property versus Jared's, where you guys are talking about those two, completely different prescription for success. And Illinois could be different from that. But you have to consider the equipment they have, the amount of acres they have, the soil, surrounding food sources. What kind of region is this? Is it a very cold region, up north, upper Midwest? Is it lower Midwest? And so there's a lot of complexities you have to look at to say this is what you should plant. That's why I can't stand when someone says you always should have beans. You should always have clover. You should always have brassica, because it's all over the chart. For what? Bottom line is, how's your November doing?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, how's your November doing, not only with food sources, but what's your herd makeup like? Are you seeing 5 times more does and fawns than bucks? That's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Really bad.
I think the glamour planning is a big one, because I've tried.
What's a glamour plant?
Well, like beans would be if you don't necessarily need to increase your population in the area, then why are you planting beans necessarily?
Well, I'm planting them. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Even corn can.
Yeah.
Corn. It's almost like the more expensive they are, the more of a glamour crop they are. Alfalfa, Roundup Ready sugar beets. Roundup Ready sugar beets. A lot of people fall for that.
Well,
and it's in it. I've seen clients
the sugar beets for sure.
I've seen sugar beets. You can imagine. I've been on about 1,600 properties now, but you can imagine all the food plot programs I've seen. I don't even know if I've had 10 properties that didn't have a food plot program.
1,600 properties.
Dang.
Yeah, this is my 20th season going to properties. But I went to one. He was up in the UP in Michigan, and he was a retired professor up there at Tech. And he would take a 1/4 acre of sugar beets and fence them 8 feet high and irrigate them. And he planned on 4 to 5 tons of food. And he would open up the fence early November and let the deer come in. So here's an area where I don't even think they have baiting now. But can you imagine 4.5 tons, 5 tons of sugar beets in a 1/4 acre setting right where he wants the deer to be, that's totally legal. And he just takes the bottom 4 feet of the fence and folds it up. Yeah, and it was close enough where he could irrigate it to a pump and a water source. But that's where I look at, like, you can't say sugar beets is not a good thing, because I've seen where it's been amazing. So it's just all over the chart for what works. But bottom line, again, it goes back to, how you doing in November, because your property and your efforts aren't graded on how you're doing in July or August.
I think a lot of it, is it's a trial and error type of thing, because of the location and the differences in properties. Like at one point in time, I was planting the same thing in Kentucky as I was in Ohio. The reality is they're two different farms, very different, and two different, very density wise as well. So now it's like trying to figure out what's going to establish. I've opened up more food plots in both of those areas. At one, I need to build the herd. The other one, I've got plenty of deer, too many deer.
Well, and to answer your question from earlier, we're talking about why would you plant beans? So because I'm not trying to build a herd. Like I think we have plenty of deer. I'm trying to anchor movement around a central destination food source. It doesn't I don't care that it's beans. I mean, maybe there's a glamour factor that drew me to that.
Yeah, it could be 12 acres of alfalfa.
It could. I chose beans because of what I feel is more of like a season-long attraction. I don't care. In fact, it may be a negative that is drawing deer in the summer, but I picked it because I feel that it's definitely attractive towards the latter part of the season where I feel no other food source is available. But I think it's effective in October, November as well, where I'm at. That's why I chose it. And honestly,
how are you doing with mature bucks? Like,
frankly, way better, Jeff, than years that I haven't planted it. So I planted it years ago.
That's your test.
That's, I think, the answer exactly.
Like you're doing well in November, then So it's not that beans shouldn't be planted, or you only have to fit them into this tight window. That's where you have to figure out what is going to work for you. And that's where, it takes a lot of, like I said, I've seen hundreds of properties, and even then you're just, so I ask a lot of questions. That's why I like a food plot interview with a client. That's about 2 hours out of the day.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going to do. And that's why it's so hard. Someone says, what should I plant online?
It's honestly, really to me, Jeff, it was the difference maker. Well, if I look back over our past 6 or 8 seasons, like on this place,
Great.
The years that I've planted that destination food source versus years that I haven't are frankly night and day, with all other green surrounding food sources being the same.
And see, look at another thing too, in Ohio. I know a game changer for some people. Everyone says game changer, but try having 4 acres of corn, a little bit of clover off the side that establishes a pattern of use. They know there's food in the area. You have good habitat. And then you go in there and brush hog an acre down end of October, another acre down early November, another acre down end of November. You're that last acre you're brush hogging in December. Those deer immediately rush to herd up around brush hogged corn. It is crazy, just pieces of corn everywhere. They love it. They can smell it for probably 2 miles in any direction.
Yeah.
It really draws them in. So I know people, that's their entire game plan, is brush hogging corn. Sure. They wouldn't even think about it, because the corn at that time, like Jared, if you had someone in the neighborhood half mile away that was brush hogging corn, they might pull a lot of those deer over to that brush hog corn. They'll say they brush hog 2 acres of corn. And so you got to think about things like it might even be something more powerful than the beans, is what I'm saying.
Well, I'm open to, obviously, right? Like I said, I pick the beans because
Well, that's what I was going to say. I guess that's the loaded question is, like, I'm not saying, but like, what if you did 12 acres of brassica?
Sure.
See, I'm thinking the 12 acres of brassica would be a bad thing.
Okay. Why would you say that, Jeff?
Because if that's the only thing you have, they tend not to like it. Now they'll eat radishes.
12 acres of carrots.
12 acres of corn piles.
They like radish. They'll eat the radish early, but some of those winter bulbs, like the purple tops, green globe,
they'll stay off of them.
They just don't like them. So if you have a marginal, you want something that's good attraction. But what about if you took half that 12 acres, you planted beans, the other half in corn?
Could.
And then you look at brush hogging some of that corn in strips.
So what's the argument there? You think that mowed corn is more attractive?
I think it is in November.
Okay.
I think they're eating the beans because there's so many deer. And they'll probably, in that case, they'll annihilate the brassica sometimes too. But
sure.
The beans, they'll hammer because they're already there. And they just keep eating them. But I've had clients that there's 50 deer on their land in January, February, March, and they did really well during the fall because it was a cold fall and winter. And then next year it's warm, and they don't even have a deer in January, February, and the beans just rot on the same number of. Or people they're literally, all the beans are still standing going into April.
Well,
and that's just year to year, and so that could be. But the corn though is highly, highly attractive when it's brush hogged.
Well, frankly, the answer to your question, why haven't I done that, is just because I've never planted corn. I've never done it, and it's more expensive per acre, right? Maybe
if you're getting Roundup Ready,
which I probably would.
It's like $1.75 a bag or something.
But if it had that much more attraction power and it was necessary, then I would do it.
I'd love to see you try it, and that would be something where I'm just looking.
Sounds like a challenge.
Sounds like you won't do it.
Okay, all right.
You won't play.
So the reason I'm saying that is, like, the beans are going to be that consistent level but what if you had that level, and then when the corn was down and you brush hogged it, the attraction level peaked greatly during that time.
Yeah.
And so that's
right before gun season.
Well, and what I love about that, Jeff, if I could figure out how to do that, I love the sculptability of corn. Like, I love that I could take, to our conversation earlier, how do I take this 12-acre destination food source and not only add more attraction with something like corn, but use that to my advantage? The Kanye quote there. How do I use that to my advantage?
To your advantage.
Do you know what I mean? Make the food source hunt even bigger.
Right. Yeah, and that's where we use the corn too. It's
I'm gonna use time to my advantage.
The corn's a tough one even around here because our deer numbers are moderate. And so it's not like they're slamming the corn in November. It's illegal to run it over. It's illegal to
what?
Yeah, you can't even run it over.
Get
out.
You can't legally run it over in Michigan, Wisconsin.
But people do it.
Really?
Minnesota. People do it, but people get caught for it too. And so it's something that you can say we're running corn down. We want it to get more moisture and all that stuff. And people run it down because they eat it faster. And then if you brush hog it, that's the fastest they eat.
Absolutely. You just created a corn pile on the ground.
You can't brush hog it. That's crazy.
Like, we don't want to do anything wrong. And so, with being in the hunting industry, you guys don't do anything. You don't want to make a violation.
Of course.
So I call my CO. If I have a question, I don't ask a buddy in the area. I call the CO. And so I'll ask my local CO. He's real nice. Every time I've talked to him, he seems real straight up. But he issued me, like, we had a nice dead buck on the property, issued me a deer recovery tag through text. I'd give my driver's license, a location, pictures. But it's really easy to work with. But he told me, he said, if I take my ATV and I drive it through a cornfield, like acre, to get to a tree stand with the thought, well, they're not going to be eating in the corn until November, so I can hunt the entire month and a half early season, blow my scent into the corn, get into a stand location and hunt the green on the backside. We've done that before, but I have to make that trail before there's ears on the ground, because if I put ears on the ground, I just baited.
Get out.
Holy cow. Deer. That's crazy.
So you're not allowed to do that. And that's where, that's why people do it though. You run it over, they eat it fast, you brush off, they eat it faster.
It's like the core strategy of Bill Winke and Mark Drury and everybody in Iowa.
Well, it's interesting because, guys all the time are like, oh, you're so against baiting. Like, what about the food plot thing? And that leads to the conversation of like row cropping, which leads to the conversation of like, well, can I mow my row crop? Mm-hmm. And I guess those states have addressed that with that law, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's even like, I've known people that have taken have a farming background or are farmers, and they can mess with the settings on the combine or their
harvest it poorly,
chopping corn, and they're wasting 50%, but they harvested, but there's 50% on the field. And that's the problem around here. Like with our corn, like the corn, the beans, they'll hit early, in September, but when you plant them late, so they'll stay green as long as possible. But once they turn brown around here, they don't touch them. And then they won't hit them in December unless it's a normal,
like this cold. December. Yeah.
It's cold and snow. So then the corn, even this year, they start hitting them more in late December, mid-December. So if that corn's not viable and highly attractive in November, and the deer aren't dying from starvation and winter kill around here, what's the use if the corn's not good until January after the season's over?
I was going to say, my corn in Kentucky, I planted probably about 6 acres, I would say. And I bet it really didn't start getting hit until February.
Yeah, see that. So then you look at it like, well, it might be cool for some sheds.
Yeah, I found a pile of sheds this year.
But, we all have, it's one thing if you have thousands of acres and you have ground to waste, but even if you have 500 acres, you still have to be.
Yeah, can't do that.
Most people don't have 500 acres and 50 acres food plots. I go to a 400 or 500 acre parcel, they might be working with 12, 15.
Mm-hmm.
Like the average. And I'm not saying the average guy owns 400 or 500 acres. I'm just saying the average person with 400 or 500 acres would be food plotting 12, 15 acres.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing when you start looking at that, and take some of these out of the way, but if I look at my Kentucky one, is the advantage of planting beans is I opened up September 3rd this year.
Sure.
Right? So like a buck on a summer bean pattern.
Well, it's the same argument that Jeff's making for corn in November. Is you want that attractiveness when you can kill them.
And they're on it. I go in opening weekend and I've got velvet bucks on green beans.
Which is awesome. Yeah, and plant in June sometimes, so it's later.
Exactly. Yep.
Because you can have green beans going into October.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll probably plant. I usually plant right around Memorial Day, give or take, depending on the weather. And then that'll give me, I should have beans through the end of September that are still green.
Well, hey, you know what? There's this cool stuff. that you can use. What do they call it? Plot boost.
Yeah, that works.
That you can spray to keep the nutritional content up higher through the growing season, so you don't have that drop off the last month of beans.
That'll be
they're still fresh like candy.
Yeah, and now we've got this liquid fertilizer coming out, which is going to be a huge opportunity to put those two together and do a single pass. So we'll have a 3. Right. One of the ones that we have coming out is a 3-18-18 for any kind of beans, clover, alfalfa, anything like legume based. So a little bit of nitrogen, but higher in phosphorus and potassium, and just mix that in the same tank and run it. And it's all foliar active. So that was the big thing. Like I'm not an agronomist, right? But the reality is like when we're pulling these soil samples and stuff and we're going and doing dry fertilizer, is that most soils are only being able to pull about 17% of that fertilizer in through the plant in the first year, right? The rest is bound up. It just like lime does, takes time to process it. So the liquid fertilizers are all foliar active, meaning you're not spraying it on the ground. The plant's actively growing. Then you're spraying it just like you do a plot boost. And it's 90% available. So for what we developed there is basically we've got like a pure nitrogen one, we've got a 3-18-18 and a 10-20-10. They're all for a 2.5 gallon bottle are basically giving you 3 times as much nutrients in the first year as a 50-pound bag of dry fertilizer would. With 2.5 gallon. So I mean, it comes back to what we're doing as food plotters. Like I'm not trying to speak on the farming language, but as food plotters, I'm putting seed in the ground. I want it to grow this year. I'm not even thinking about next year at this point. Yeah, and that's what these are focused on.
Yeah, it's and if those can be sprayed, I've considered. We have a couple companies local, but using a drone to spray.
You could. Yeah,
to get it over that corn, that would be just outstanding.
We've got a 2500. We're calling it Nitro Grow, of course, and it's but it's a timed release nitrogen. So it's a slow release nitrogen to go over corn and stuff. So it'll release it periodically through the plant use opportunity.
How many weeks
what do they call those, Nick?
For that,
XRs?
That corn to use it up.
From what they were saying, somewhere between 5 and 7,
which is perfect because then you put it in mid.
That's
so you fertilize the beginning and then you fertilize in the middle.
Yep. And then by the end, you've already tasseled out at that point.
That's perfect.
Yep. So that's cool. And that's what it was developed for, was the slow release on the main ag side, but you were buying it in 5,000 gallon tanker loads. So we're just basically proportioning that down to a 2.5 gallon bottle and so like that, when you talking about trying to hit your brassica or your cereal grain with like just a nitrogen boost right before like first frost.
September 1 when you put your oats down.
Done. Like hit it with that and it's just gonna, and then it'll do another release probably 3 to 4 weeks later right before your first frost.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things just kind of with the food plotting and everything we talked about. It's kind of, there's so much, you can get so wrapped up in what to plant and forget about the strategy of why you're planting the food plots in the first place and how it controls access, how those big food sources dictate where does will bed and dictate where bucks won't bed. Yep. And you have to have that enough depth. So it's kind of like you can plant a poor crop food plot in a location that's the best location. And that'll be better than the best food plot you could ever plant in the wrong location, no matter what you do. And everyone thinks they're putting it in the right location. And that's you try to hammer over and over again that location really does matter. And you have to think of all those concepts together to move deer and move deer where you want them to be and determine where deer are at. That's why you put food on an 80-acre parcel of all woods. You put food where you know they're going to be deer when you go in the afternoon, and you know where they're going to be in the morning where you walk in. And when you walk out, then that food, we use food, like if it's out in the middle of the fields around here, we can walk right through our food plots during daylight. You can go in one way, come out the other way through the food, go in the food in the afternoon, and then come out through the woods in the afternoon.
So many people skip right over that. They all they care about is where the deer are. And it's just important to know where they aren't.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's why someone says, dang, we have this swamp in the northeast corner of our property and there's no deer there. It's kind of just like wasted acres. I'm like, no, you can walk against it. You can blow your scent into it.
Yep.
Deer aren't going to be there. It's an absolute, and that's not a bad thing. No different than having a schoolyard next to your property.
Or a cattle pasture.
I had a client in Michigan, and he's walking through the schoolyard to go hunting and got tackled by a bunch of sheriff's deputies and police. And,
oh no!
And, he had a gun with him, and going through where he was going was actually legal in the end to do, because he was adjoining landowner and it was public property, but it just didn't look good.
No, it didn't look good.
They snuck up on him. They took his gun. They took everything he had on him. He spent the night in jail. He got released, and he had to fight it for a couple months. He got everything back, but it was a really big ordeal. So, anyways,
he's like, Jeff Sturgis told me to walk through here.
Well, this is after I was there. Because I probably would have been to blame.
Just like I've never seen this guy in my life.
Going through that school or along that was a great access for him. It got him to the back of the property from the opposite end of where he could locate, and he could blow a scent into the school area.
Great in theory.
Yeah, in theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
listen, officers, I was just trying to blow my scent into the schoolyard. That could get you arrested too.
My
you gotta watch about that one as well, Nick, with your corduroy hat.
It's funny. He was trying to sneak into his property so much he didn't even see him sneaking up behind him.
Wow.
And they just tackled him flat to the ground before he could even react.
That's impressive. They got on. I didn't know schoolyards had such high security.
He probably got called on. That access stuff is critical. The other thing I've found, and unfortunately, a couple of my properties have it, is I can come in through public on a bunch of mine as well.
Oh yeah.
And I don't really care how I access through the public. I just walk through it to get to where I need to on the backside of my property.
Here's an interesting question. How do you feel about, like, here's where I'm at odds with this is, I guess what I'm going to propose is walking with wind blowing into the neighbors, regardless of, and so where I'm at odds with that is, like, I realize deer don't just use your property. You want to at a macro level look at the whole landscape.
Sure.
But I don't want them on my neighbors at all. And so, like, do you consider just, like, blowing your wind right into a good topographical spot, knowing that you can't ever hunt it?
Here, I thought you were going to talk about ethics, but you went the other direction.
Oh, no. No.
No,
and Jeff will be with me on this. Jeff is pretty direct approach with the neighbors. It's a screw your neighbors approach.
There's a lot of times it depends on where your food's located too, because there's times where we're walking in on a border, blowing our scent into a neighbor.
Yeah, where they're coming to your food.
That border is 700 yards away from a big food source, or 600 yards. We know there's the deer, like, you can look at a mature buck. He likes to live within that, like an average parcel, mixed ag, mixed subdivision, more not big wood setting.
Mm-hmm.
Big wood setting, I've seen them live 3/4 a mile away from their daily food source that they go to every single afternoon.
Yeah.
Where in normal settings, it's more like 200-300 yards. So if you're 600 yards away, why would he be living over there and coming to your food plot every day unless you pushed him there and spooked him there?
Mm-hmm.
Then at the same time, we have areas where we're blowing our scent towards a neighbor, but it's before the deer are in that bedding area on the neighbors. And then by the time the sun comes up and the thermals kick up, the wind's rising, then the deer start to fill in an hour later because we're so far away from ag lands or food sources that, we walked in blowing our scent at the neighbors. But there's properties right now I can think of where if I go in along a border and blow my scent into that neighbor, I'm blowing deer that I count on coming off that neighbor's and shooting.
Okay. So that answers my question, I think.
So it just depends. I mean, there's probably no absolute to that in any way.
Yeah. So you're saying you would prefer to consider the macro consequences and say, hey, I'm counting on deer coming off the neighbors, as opposed to ignoring that and just blowing wind to the neighbors, knowing it's going to blow them out of there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So it just depends. It's all about where the deer at now. And if you think you're getting around that deer and he's between you and that food source and you're waiting for him to come back to you, then who cares where you're blowing your scent? But if you're on the flip side, if you're going in the afternoon and you need that neighbor's bedding area to draw those deer, then you're considering where that scent is going. You're coming in with the wind, maybe, for example. Like I can think of a spot where we're coming with the wind, the neighbor's bedding's over here, and then we wrap around, blow our scent that way, and wait for the deer to come off the neighbors, and we're blowing our scent to a safe side.
Yeah, I think honestly, that comes down to whether you're hang and hunt or whatever the actual stand setup. Because I mean, a lot of those guys are putting a fixed stand on that food plot, and they're hunting that morning and evening, which is not going to be the right way to do it.
Yeah, they're spooking the deer off in the morning, and
and
like, there's some places where we go and hunt certain areas, certain days because we know the neighbor's hunting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just use them as like a wind bump, basically.
Yeah, especially when like you count on deer being in a certain bedding area, a certain pocket of cover, and they're there all the time because it's so good. You know they're there. And then when the neighbor hunts, they walk through that and bump them. Even though the neighbor doesn't hunt very often, you know the day after or 2 days after, it's really good hunting. Yeah. Like we notice that in our trail cameras. Bucks are here now, and they weren't there the week before, and you find out the neighbor was hunting then, and then after a week they go back home where they wanted to. And it might only be 300 yards away. That's just where they live.
Yeah.
So you have to consider all those little pieces of strategy, which is the fun part about what we do.
Well, and Jeff, when you start to look at that November time period and really trying to influence them on the food plot side, I mean, clearly, like, those deer are also utilizing other neighbor properties around you as well. It's just trying to maximize their daylight movement on your property because that's the influential time period.
Yeah, and you know, fortunately, unfortunately, most people with food plots, I would say over 90% overhunt their food plots.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so bucks are very reactive to that. And so you could have equal food across the board, but very rarely do people keep the deer from thinking that their food plots are being hunted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll give you an example, like our Wisconsin property we hunt. We have 3.25 acres of food plots, and we cannot sit on those with a bow.
Wow.
At all. But over the last 10 years, we've shot 14 bucks, you know, where you get 2 tags a year.
Yep.
And now we have shot some of the distance with the muzzleloader or rifle, mostly muzzleloader on that property. But a lot of the deer have been shot with bows up in the hills around there. And if we didn't have those food plots down there to anchor the movement, hold the does down there in that hollow next to the food, then the bucks wouldn't be up in the ridges around there.
And that's
exactly the destination food source that I'm describing. We don't really hunt.
Mm-hmm. It's just pulling everything down.
I have one stand that's accessible with an east wind, and it's deadly. Yeah, I mean, you get in there an east wind, like you're killing them.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, we don't hunt it. It's all.
Like you said, Jared, like all those satellite areas, all those around there.
Exactly.
You said, you get all kinds of big buck movement, and you don't need. And that's what everyone thinks they have to go sit in the middle of that. Yep. Well, because they see it on, you know, on cable TV or hunting shows.
So that big 4-year-old I told you about, it's a friend of ours that hunts with us killed that deer. It's like a 150s type deer. I mean, for our farm, like, it's every year it's getting better. Killed that deer on a rye plot that we access through a dead zone, which we talked about here, like a cattle pasture on a destination like sorry, I'm getting all my words mixed up here. Long day of podcasting here. Yeah, mock scrape, and that was maybe 200 yards or more off of the destination source on the way back to the buck bedding, and he killed it in the morning. Textbook. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's like I have that grain source there to anchor him. Got the rye plot that he's just creeping through. It's like a 1/4 of an acre. He's got the scrape right in the middle of it. That's where I'm putting a water hole in with the bentonite that I mentioned to you. I do want to talk about that before we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And he crushed him.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I see a lot of clients doing that where they're hunting back on small satellite hunt. And I love water holes. To me, are even a higher value than the small food plots.
Yeah.
And so, and especially when you put 2, like the one where I killed that buck last year here in Minnesota. I killed the other buck in Wisconsin I killed last year was over a water hole. And that's where I passed him the year before in that same stand over that water hole. Same timing.
That's cool.
And then this year I had a water hole that I could have hunted closer to the bedding area where that buck went into in the morning, because we had pictures of him going into that morning. But the wind was iffy on that water hole, and the wind was iffy in the bedding area stand. So then I had to skip over to the small hunting plot, hunt that. But if you're considering that whole line of movement where that mature buck goes, it's not about picking the right stand. It's just picking the right stand that the wind tells you to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
You go sit in it. and likely he's going to go buy all 3 of those stands to begin with. If you've done everything right and set it up right.
Well, this stand that I'm talking about, it is a food plot, and there is a scrape there, and we're killing deer there already. But it definitely calls for a water hole because all the bedding is around. It's like up on a high point, and between there and the destination grain source, there is no water. They could drop down to the bottoms, and there's creeks and stuff down there. But my gut is telling me they want a water source there. It's on a gas line, and something is causing erosion, and it's creating craters, kind of. And one of them, fairly close to that scrape, happens to be holding water. I don't know when that happened or how long it's going to last, but there's water in it right now. It's like a 10 by 10 foot water hole, basically. And it's like a foot and a half deep, and it's like pretty sweet the way that it is. I don't have a lot of confidence necessarily that it's going to stay that way. So I'm going to send Dad to the co-op to buy some bentonite, and I'm going to plan to incorporate that with the soil once it drains to the best of my ability. To listeners who've not heard of that, bentonite is, and you can expand on, I think it's sodium bentonite. It's some sort of it turns into gelatinous, it's a way to turn your soil into a more
like a
clay.
Clay.
That's what it is, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's my plan. And I want to know if you have any thoughts on that, any feedback.
So I love water. And I know a lot of people that have made great water holes like that too, and it works really well. I know you have to tamp down the bentonite too.
Yeah.
And so it's not you just throw it in there like powder and it settles.
No.
You want to smash it.
Well, you have to incorporate it with the soil. So I'm going to take a rock rake and rake the crap out of it.
Nice. Yeah. Well, the only thing, and I talked to you about that, Jeremy. I don't know if Jared, you were around when I was talking about that, but
he was, and I was going to bring it up. I didn't know if you had talked about it yet or announced.
Yeah. Well, no, not the water holes.
You just were pregnant.
We're still the water holes. We're still working on a water hole. We want to wait till a specific water hole, and it's just, and really what we're competing against is Rubbermaid with 300-gallon tanks, and they manufacture their own, so their manufacturing costs are really low, and frankly, the net profit margin hasn't been high enough to do what we want to. So we're looking at other companies though, but we have a CAD design. But what I was going to mention though is one of the things I worry about is with a water hole with EHD. So EHD and the midge propagates in that cracking mud again around natural holes. And so if we have a 300-gallon tank, we have zero mud. There's no mud. And so I look at it like on our property here in Minnesota, we have zero standing water other than our water holes. Now, half mile away on the neighbor's property, they have a cattle. 3/4 of a mile away on a neighbor, they have some dug-in water holes. And there's a picture last year in September that my neighbor shared, and there's like $7 in his water hole. And it just, the first thing I thought of was there's a EHD, EHD breeding ground.
Yeah.
Where all those deer, all those bucks could be infected if EHD makes it, because it's been within 2 miles of us. They lost a whole bunch of deer down in the valley, maybe in 2019.
Wow.
And so that's my fear, is that with water holes, natural water holes, now if you have them all over your property anyways, there's not much you can do about it than a big dug water hole. But where we have dry hills around here, then I really like the tanks, because I feel like in theory, there wouldn't be a reason for there to be EHD.
That's a great point, and I think it's a great point. If I were to apply it to my scenario, we're, in fact, even on that stand, I'm accessing through cattle pasture, and anywhere there's cattle, there's going to be a lot of mud, and so I'm sure it's there. So I don't think in this situation it's going to be
any reason you chose that. What's it called? Bentonite versus like a large liner, like pond liner.
I would definitely use bentonite.
Yeah.
We've used pond liners before. And so let's say it looks good for a year or two, and then all of a sudden the edges start coming up, water gets behind it, and then it freezes, and then it lifts that liner out.
Yeah.
And so it can create a real mess, and then you have to undig it out, and get the mud off the top of it. It's just a big mess. We've had to do that. We used a rubber roofing liner, which was awesome. It didn't crack or break. It was just, And all of a sudden, all the edges are the farmer even said where we were hunting. So what's that mess you guys left out there?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it was aesthetic was one, also ease of like putting it in, even though it's going to be a lot of work to incorporate the bentonite. It would have been more because I would have wanted to dig it all out and essentially bury the liner completely.
Yeah.
And even then, if it kind of eroded, I would worry that like hooves might go through it because they're going to be in it.
Yeah.
And stuff. So yeah, bentonite. And bentonite, boy, it's like there seems to be like a massive warning on it. It's like may or may not work. You know, and it's,
I don't think I've never messed with it.
That is true. I've had clients or it's worked for 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden it just drains out. We have a dry water hole out here, and I was told to use bentonite. I don't know. But we took out 2 wet water holes with a skid steer because we were worried about EHD. We just took out the back and got rid of them. But another thing, too, is people will take that liner, and then they put rocks all the way around it for 4 feet out or 3 foot out to hold that liner down.
Yeah.
To me, deer don't like.
They don't want to step on that.
Yeah,
no,
they're like, I'm going to step in this spiritual.
Maybe a doe or fawn that's used to it all the time. They live there 365. But imagine that buck that comes in just for the hunting season. Does he actually ever get used to walking rocks?
There's another water hole on our property that's like, and it's not like we're lacking water. There's creeks and stuff everywhere, but there's one right at the bottom of the bowl, right by the Ramsey Road there, and all the water kind of comes down to this point. And there's a road that we have going across it. And so historically there's been a culvert there, and it got washed out at some point. So Dad and I went back in and redid it and dug some of the stuff out, and did a lot of clay down there naturally and stuff. And it's just beautiful. It's a perfect water hole. And there's a road along the side of it, so I can drive past it. I can run a camera on it. And we see the deer, the way the deer use that is just like so cool, so entertaining. Like those bucks will stand right in it. You see them fighting in it, and you know what I mean? They're not afraid of it at all. Like it's they use it a lot.
Interesting.
I like if I could choose like dugout water holes at every spot we have, and like a nice 10, 12, 15 foot diameter area with gentle slopes and that always held water, and there's no EHD risk. That'd be beautiful. That'd be perfect.
Yeah.
And you could guarantee 100% they always held water. And that's just what I see. It's like you put 4 in and 3 don't, or 1 doesn't hold water, 3 do. 1 drains out after a couple of years. It's just it's less work. If I put it, we've shot a lot of deer over water holes we installed in that June or July or August.
That I like a lot what you're saying about the EHD. I think that's a really valid point. You know, so for some of your and I mean for anywhere where you think EHD is a concern or where there isn't a lot of mud already. What is the deal with your water holes? Are those still in the planning phase? Is that something that you're going to be really, what can you say about
frankly,
those?
we went through one company, and we have a certain size we wanted, and we have a ramp built in. It's a really nice CAD design. And I think it was 286 gallons. And it was similar to the Rubbermaid size. We talked about putting a dome over the top to keep out fawns and bears in the spring, and then take that off July or somewhere. But it was the cost per unit.
Yeah, prohibitive
we have the seed company. We do really well on our net profit margin there. Some seeds are good, some seeds are bad, but overall we look at an average for the company. And where the water holes would have been on the low end of all our seeds or worse.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been a smart thing to do for us. So among everything else we do, we've been trying to contact a couple other companies that could potentially rotomold those for us and create a mold. But it's something that we'll continue to pursue, but it's not something we can do at this time.
Maybe somebody will see this and reach out to you.
Jeff, when you think about
that's because I tell people about the Rubbermaids.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with the Rubbermaids though, they're too deep, right? That's
a good thing. That's a really good thing because they're 25 inches deep. The deer can step right into them. They get down on their knees. I've seen
I'm thinking of a deeper one. The ones I've seen are,
25 inches is, so the 300-gallon Rubbermaid is 25 inches deep, and it's 63 inches by 69 inches.
Yeah.
So in that depth, what they'll go through is there's a couple factors, but with that depth, they go through about 100 gallons a month in drought, in moderate use. Mm-hmm. So you fill that in September. You just get a few rains in there. You put them below the ground a little bit so they actually get some runoff into them. And you really, that 300 gallon is the size, because I started at 27.5 gallons, 55 gallon drums cut in half, and then went to 110, 100, then 150. And then 300 gallons. We replaced all our 150s last year. So everything's 300 now.
And that's because of evaporation for the most part, right?
It is. So if you have one that's only 10 inches deep or 15 inches deep and it's really big, I've seen some water holes out there that are 90 some inches by 90 some inches. For one, you can't even carry them in a pickup bed.
Yeah.
But two, they're so shallow that it doesn't take much hot weather, and that's gone. And of course, then a 55 gallon drum stood up vertically is too deep. They can just get the top few inches, and they can't even get their antlers down in it. Maybe they could go down a foot. So there's that extreme. So that balance in between is what you look for. And even in the 150s, we had deer that would totally submerge themselves and stand in there. The 150s are still, they've got to be 60 some inches long. And so there'd be 30 some inches wide.
Well, I mean,
so they're still easy to get into.
If you like it for what it is, Jeff, maybe instead of designing if it's perfect as is, you just need an affiliate link or a discount code or a partnership with Rubbermaid. I'm sure you sell enough of them.
The one thing though I'd really like is we have to add a critter stick to everything. Mm-hmm. And those critter sticks get bumped out. You have one dead squirrel in there. For one, you feel bad for the squirrel, and two, it rottens up the water. You have to replace the water before deer will use it again.
Yeah.
So, and then you forget to put a critter stick in. You think, I left the saw at home, so I got to chainsaw something down. The fresh cut one is always the best. So, a built-in ramp so that critters can get out easily.
Yeah.
They panic. I've watched squirrels fall in there, and I had one that it was in 110 gallon, and there's the squirrels messing around, and the one falls in and just thrashes. You're like, oh my gosh, hope that thing doesn't die. I feel bad for the thing. Thing finally gets on the log and jumps out, and it gets over to this oak tree, and it just stood there shivering in the water. And its buddy that was standing there watching the whole time jumps in and does the same thing. So the next squirrel jumps in, finally gets out, and they're both kind of shivering over there. Eventually, they're out collecting nuts and whatever squirrels do. But they didn't learn from each other. But I've seen that over and over again. So even just having a log floating in there,
is something.
They'll jump out then, But that's where another thing is that lid. We'd like to have a dome of some sorts to keep fawns out. We had a fawn fall in last year, and the mother helped it out. Everything was fine. But I've heard of 2 people in the last couple of years that said they found a dead fawn in their water holes. Wow. And so out of all the thousands of people you hear about, 2 is not a lot, but it's too many if you can prevent it.
Yeah.
What's kind of your rule of thumb, Jeff, on the water holes in relation to, like, let's say, like free flowing water and stuff on a property? I mean, is it like, hey, if you got free flowing water, like within eyesight, the water hole probably should go somewhere else because they've got that? Or, is it just in terms of a placement wise on a property where it's most appropriate?
So sometimes, like some of the properties where it's not appropriate are those properties that have a lot of swamp on them. Mm-hmm. So there's just standing water everywhere, and it's stagnant, it's nice, deer like it. But you go into a lot of creeks, they might have a 3-foot steep bank getting down in. There's really no access for them to get down in there. It's moving, it's flowing, it's cold. And I remember talking to John Azoga about that probably 20 years ago. And he even said it does seem like deer prefer stagnant water. He said he didn't know if it was the warmth of the water compared to the cold creek.
Yeah.
Because deer are efficient drinkers. They just take a quick drink and move on.
Yeah.
So if it's super cold, they don't like a chilled beverage like we do and just sit and just keep taking a sip. They want to drink and move on. And then also there could be minerals associated with that, algae, something that they like when it's stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, so if they have dry bedding area and they're exiting that in the afternoon, and they're the way they want to travel to get to that afternoon food source, wherever it's at on your property or your neighbors, is dry, then it's appropriate for a water hole. Let's say you have that bedding area and 100 yards the opposite side, there's water.
Yeah.
Well, if you can offer water on the right side of their movement where they want to go every afternoon anyways, then they don't want to go out of their way to get that water and come back. You just give them water on the way and they'll hit it. And so we have a lot of water at the bottom around here in our ravines. Even in Wisconsin, there's water down at the bottom, but up in those hills around, and once you get mid elevation up, those bucks don't want to go all the way down to the water, often out in the open, to hit a cold, clear stream when they can just hit a stagnant water hole up top that's warmer. The only thing we see with water, and I've seen this consistently over the last few years, really taken notice, where water holes, they almost turn into black water or stained acidic water. When you have pine needles or walnuts falling into them, it can really taint. And I'm sure there's other things too. I'm sure a bunch of acorns could taint them too.
Right.
And just make the water very bitter. So we go in with a rake and you clear out the debris every spring. Yeah. And that's all we ever do to clean them out.
Interesting. Yeah. I wondered about the bedding, on the way through towards a hunting plot and then eventually one of those holding plots of, I've got, like, even on my property here, I've got a really cold water, free flowing creek down in the bottom closer to the main road. Most of my property is on the other side of the creek, where the bedding is, where my food is, where my access is. And so it seems counterproductive for them to go off course from their bedding down to the creek or to the plot and then to the creek. Whereas if it was all aligned, it'd make more sense for them to hit that. And it would be a better, frankly, give me another hunting spot versus just sitting off of my food all the time.
Well, look at it this way too. We've had cameras where when we used to pull cards back in the old days, pull a card.
Right.
But, we'd leave it soaking for a while and we'd have 800 pictures on a water hole. And this is going back 15 years at least. So there's 800 pictures on a water hole. And we're going in October, sometime around there, and we're pulling a card. So this would have been like all of late August, September, and early October. So 800 pictures, and like 700 pictures are in the afternoon and 100 pictures are in the morning. And think about it, if they go eat on green vegetation all night, they don't need to take a drink on the way back to the bedding area. So they're sitting bedding area, though, they're dry all day. And then the first thing they want to do is hit water. So even if that water hole, you wouldn't want to put the water hole after a hunting plot that has green in it. So they just go taking a drink almost. Do they have that urge to actually hit water after they hit their food plot?
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, if you're trying to time management that buck and make sure he goes in the right direction, bedding area here, hunting plot 150 to 200 yards away, and then a big plot after that. Well, if you rely on that buck to get up and think, okay, I'm going to go 200 yards to that little hunting plot and then the big food plot 100 yards after that, that 200-yard connection, there is a hole there. Does he go 200 yards or does he go another direction? Put that water hole there. That's one more reason he stays on your land, going from that bedding area to that water hole, to that food plot, to that big food plot. Maybe he doesn't even use the water hole, but it's part of his pattern of daily use. So kind of getting back to what Jared said, I do believe that you can put a very, very unfair percentage of mature bucks on a parcel compared to all the other parcels around you. I think you can, in most circumstances, shoot 80% of those target bucks in the neighborhood over a 10-year period, where you're surrounded by other hunters because they're hunting poorly, their food plots are managed poorly, their habitat is not aligned properly, they're not controlling the daylight movement. Now, who cares how many bucks you see in the middle of the night? You're right. A good ratio you should always see on a good property at least one mature buck in and around daylight versus one picture that's after in the middle of the night or better. The better properties you see 2 to 1, 3 to 1 bucks in and around daylight or during daylight.
Wow.
I think like where Jeff's experience on 1,600 plus properties really pays off is like anybody can go out and identify a bedding area or a food source or a scrape, like all these things. Where it's really challenging is to tie them together and to understand what a string of movement is going to look like.
Yeah.
And I've even struggled with that on my own farm. I'm like, there's all this stuff everywhere. Like there's not like a contiguous use of it. And it's really it took us 8 years of hunting our home farm and countless conversations with Jeff and everybody else that we talked to finally now start to realize like, okay, I can see now a pattern of a rhythm of movement, how this is happening here. And now I can start to manipulate these pieces or align them in a sense that, it makes sense. I have them there for a better part of daylight usage, and it's like I can take advantage of it from a hunting standpoint.
Well, look at you, Jared. Like you're starting to. I mean, it sounds like you're starting to figure out at year 8, and year 10 will be better.
Yeah.
But look at all the input you've had from so many different people in the industry that actually do it for a living. So look at the average guy.
It would take a lifetime.
They'll say, well, we'll figure it out. It probably won't. And the problem is too, is that they beat their head against the wall for 10 years. Usually we're out at like year 5 or 7.
Yeah.
They go gangbusters, and we see people that spend $15,000, $20,000 on habitat improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And they've had multiple consultants come out, and they're at their wits' end. They're ready to sell. Mm-hmm. And they come out, and you go out there, and it's like they have shooting houses on food plots. They're going through food plots to get to other food plots. They have no core area. They have no contiguous area where it's all deer all the time. They're blowing their scent into bedding areas. Deer can watch them going in and out. They use machines to get in and out. There's all these things that are like, and some people do it all.
Yeah.
But then they're this food plot's planted in this food plot's planted in this food plot's planted in this. They're all different food plots, and too many food plots in the heart of their property. People will say, well, when can I go use that stand in the middle of my 40-acre parcel? When would you use that? I say never. To me, it's black and white. And so that's how I hunt and manage. It's pretty easy because then I see all these. I just learn from other people's mistakes. It's not that I came up with this stuff on my own. It's like you guys have seen my list of notes in here. It's thousands of notes long of bullet points of article and video ideas. They all come from client properties. I get kind of lean when I haven't been on a client trip for a while, and we have to do 8 videos in a day like Monday. It's what, I haven't been on properties, and that's where you get the best questions and the best observations. But, to the average person, it's daunting.
Yeah.
And so like Jared, I mean, you're kind of like testament of that. You're at year 7, 8, and you've had a lot of input, but you're passionate about it too. This is what you do as you're living too. Right. You're looking at this stuff all the time. You live this 365, where the average guy, even if they're into it, they're not living at 365.
Well, and it's funny because while I'm kind of leading the charge from how we're developing the property and stuff, I've got my dad and my uncle, his good friend, and another good friend of ours. There's 5 guys basically that hunt this property that all want to have they want to have input on how we hunt it. They don't care what I plant or any of that. And that's fine. Like, it's not my farm to control, right? It's my dad owns it, and I want everybody to have a great time. So selfishly, I'm a little bit looking forward to, like, when you come out, I'm going to have those guys there with us, and we're going to go around. And when you say you can never access this way, I'm going to say,
Jeff said so.
That's what Jeff said.
So it wasn't me.
So one of my clients, really, really nice client, his name's Doug from Michigan. And Doug's from he was a client maybe, let's say 12, 14 years ago. And so talked to him, and they have 160 acres. And their dad would drive right through the middle, like 80 on left, 80 on right through the middle, all the way to the back to his favorite blind. Well, his favorite blind was he's capturing deer off the neighbors, capturing that movement because they're pushing every deer off their property, going right through the middle of the valley system.
Yeah.
So,
and then coming back out of it, he's bumping everything off that food source.
Yeah. It's just, so the boys hire me, the sons, to come out and say, this is the way it should be done. So I got 2 really cool pictures that year. The first was only within a couple weeks after I was there. They had their dad's blind on chains, like carrying it with the front end loader and taking it out of that area and moving it to one of the outside locations. Mm-hmm. The second picture was their dad during the hunting season with the biggest buck he'd shot in over 50 years.
Wow.
And it was awesome. Just giving that valley over to the deer.
Yeah.
And so I get a lot of people that hire us because we'll go to over 300 properties this year with the guys, and they hire us to come out and basically tell their dad or other partner or whatever, hunting buddy, the way things should be done because they're tired of them listening to them.
Absolutely. I get it, man. Well, and it's it's hard, especially when it's like a property. It doesn't matter if it's 160 or 1,600. At the end of the day, like when there's one property and it's kind of the property to hunt, it's hard, especially when you're just staring at it all the time, to try to think outside the box or think that maybe you have been doing something so detrimental to the property that it's the reason that you're not having success in hunting. And I think that's just you talk to a lot of people about that, and people are like, well, no, I'm hunting only these stands during west winds, and I'm doing this, and then clearly it's something that has been staring them in the face for so long. Like, well, but you're walking right through here, and those deer are bedded on the ridges above you. They see you walking in, and it's like immediately they're just like, oh, and they've stared at it so much, and they've done it for so long that they just don't realize like that is the thing that could be ruining the property for them.
Repeated patterns add to the problem.
Yep.
So they go in a certain way, and they might even think, man, if I go in this way, am I going to spook something? Well, they don't, because they already spooked it, or maybe they don't.
Yep.
They do it again because it worked the first time. Fourth time. Deer pattern us so easy compared to us patterning them.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So by the third, fourth time, the deer just are wise to the area. They just don't live in those areas where they're so. For 7 years, they've done that same thing and never spooked a deer. Well, it's because the deer figured them out the second time in, third time in, and those repeated patterns.
And they translate that to success, Jeff. They translate that to I'm getting in and out clean. Nothing's busting me. Meanwhile, it's been blown from the get-go on it.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Right. And that's where the hunting industry and hunters in general, what's really tough is there's no measurables. There's no stats. Baseball, Tony Gwynn, they said, I think Tony Gwynn, if he didn't bat if he struck out the last 1,000 at bats, he still would have had a 300 average.
Yeah.
About that. And so who do you want to learn from, a Tony Gwynn or someone who had a lifetime batting average of 230? And so golf, what have you won? How well have you done?
Yeah.
And who do you want to take golf lessons from? Or what do you want to learn from? Where hunting is more, there's no measurable. So everyone's a good hunter. Everyone thinks in their mind, I've been for 32 years. It boils down to the number of years, not success. And I think even in the scientific community, sometimes it can get to where we're doing this biologically correct, this percentage-wise correct. So that's got to translate into a good herd. And maybe the hunting's not that important. No, the hunting is important. If you have a good herd, if you have good property, you're going to kill a lot of bucks. So you can't have a great hunt without a great herd. You can't have a great habitat, a great herd without a great hunt. It all goes together. And that's the measurable. So you look at, success ultimately, like I'll go to properties and the uncle's saying, well, we've always done real well. And then the son's saying, well, what have we shot in the last 6 years? What have we seen? The neighbors shot this. The neighbors shot this. We haven't shot any of those bucks. We don't even see them. Why is that? Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of, it is really hard in the hunting community. It's not like, what do we measure by? There's no numbers. Mm-hmm. You can't really. So how can you even measure someone's advice online?
Yeah.
Really.
Well, that's why we don't give any advice, Jeff. We bring it all in.
Then it's safe.
Seriously, at the very beginning of this, we're like, what are we going to talk about? You know what I mean? And I think we literally looked at your channel as like some source of inspiration. We're like, well, we don't know anywhere close to that much. There's no way we could just do that. We couldn't just educate people. And fortunately, we found our niche, which was just to ask the stupid questions and have conversations about it. And then ultimately, we've learned a lot throughout the process, but I think other people learn that way too, because I think a lot of people have the same
tons of experience too. I mean, you do this. Yeah, you guys have done so well on the channel and everything you do. It's amazing.
Yeah,
pretty amazing on the outside to watch it. Because I get partners that ask me all the time. Manufacturers will say, can you see anybody else, who would be a good fit for what we do? Mm-hmm. And you guys are that kind of fit because you have a good message, you bring a good voice, and you have people that are passionate about listening to you and respect what you say. So
well, and it's fun. We appreciate that, first of all, but we've enjoyed recently having partners ask us the same. You know what I mean? Yeah. And we've had people beneath us that we're like, yes, absolutely. Let's get these guys connected. And we want to have these people on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
That's been fun.
It's a weird opportunity, I think, with a lot of us, with what you and Jen are doing, and we talked to like Bo Martonic and
Allie DeAndres.
We have this cool opportunity as like an online community to like have, call it an alliance of sorts. Where frankly, like the TV guys and stuff they didn't have that. Like it was very.
Oh, they did.
They did.
Definitely.
It was segmented out a
Lee
lot.
just talked about it. He's like, it was me. It was Don Kiske.
Well,
it was
but those
Waddell.
guys were hanging
They were all
out.
under the Real Tree flag.
Well, they were. That was the original kind of alliances. Is like you were Mossy Oak or your Real Tree. You don't see that now.
No.
Yeah, but look at you look at those guys. Even throw Jay Gregory into the
He
mix.
was definitely.
You have Gray Brothers and Kiskis and Lukaska. But you look at that group right there. Show me another group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
that was the group. That was like the group. And I'm not saying there weren't other people, and I know I'm missing some names, but I know that group right there, that was about it. And it wasn't like, no, you guys are bringing people from all over the place. Well, what was the kid that poached the deer? I can't remember.
CJ.
CJ.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a cool interview, and being able to get people like that on there and just to hear their story, whether it's right or wrong or criminal or not, it was just it's cool to hear that influence and their perspective, experience.
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to whether it's a story like CJ's or just this discussion we're having here. Like, there's a lot of people that are not on a platform having these discussions every day. We're just trying to bring it to a platform and then have the discussion so that they can continue that discussion off the platform.
Well, and fortunately, like, it's exciting for us to see there's a lot of people. So because the podcast resonates, we imagine that a lot of the things we're fighting for or having discussions about, like there are a lot of people who are really passionately at least talking about the same thing. So when we talk about some of the state regulation stuff, some of these farm improvement stuff, like all the stuff with the Ibotta Farm, to see people get behind that is like if at one time we felt like, man, the hunting where it's dead, like there's because outdoor TV went away and there was like not that central meeting place anymore, but that's I think what the podcast has done for us is it's reinvigorated us to see that, dude, people are just as passionate about hunting as ever.
Yeah, it's just in a different.
We have some straightening out of the resource to do.
Sure,
and that's what our generation is probably for here to do for it. But it's there.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of characters you can bring on here. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, anything new coming up with Whitetail?
Why don't you? Can you use this to? You don't have to run down through the entire seed line, but Jeremy mentioned earlier, like our partnership with your Pure Wildlife seeds. Do you want to?
Which is a rebrand, right? As of this year.
Yeah, it was WHS Wildlife Blends, and so we just changed it to Pure Wildlife Blends. And the Pure was really important because it's reflective of what we're putting into the seed or what we're not coating the seed with. So if you look at a lot of the big box store brands, in order for them to meet the demands of pricing for XYZ super box store, then they have to cheapen those prices to be able to get in there and actually make any kind of profit margin. So what they do is they coat the seed and they fill it. So there's a lot of those big brands. If you go to the stores, they're 30% inert matter. And so and Jeremy, maybe you could even speak to this, but people will coat seed, and there is a little bit of positive that can come from coating the seed. But if the coating the seed takes up 30% of the bag and you're buying 10 pounds of seed, it does not make up for the loss of 3 pounds of seed. It might make up for the loss of a quarter pound of seed, a very small percentage. So they're specifically using lime. And we've looked at this with 2 different whole seed wholesalers where they're specifically coating the seed with lime to take up space to improve profit margins. So they're really only selling you 7 pounds of seed instead of 10 pounds of seed.
I didn't know that.
We have to pay to actually remove the lime coating on some of our seed because we want to be pure. So we have to pay literally, to remove that coating of lime that does nothing. You know what? Lime is measured in tons per acre, not pounds per acre.
Yeah, ounces per seed.
It's just space, and they'll even color it so it looks fancy.
Yeah.
And so what we found over the last 2 years, because we started in the summer of 2022, that since that time, every year it becomes harder to buy uncoated seed.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal is to be the last company that has coated seed just purely to improve profit margins. And so that was why we changed the name to Pure. But on top of that, like the seed, a lot of different people have seed companies out there. There's a lot of people coming out with seed companies. I started writing about food plot seed blends and experimenting back. Well, our first food plots were in the 90s, 95. But then experimenting and writing about it, publishing Quality Whitetails, Michigan Outdoors, talking about it, food plots for a long time. And I just experiment and play around mixing brassica and clover back around 2000. We found that, for example, when you mix brassica and clover, you get that clover for the following year, which is awesome. We call that dual threat 365 because you have the brassica for the fall and then you have the clover base for the following year. You get the cool season annual. And I used to do a lot of rotations of that, where half the field I'd replant every year and just rotate. And so you'd always have clover during the summer in an area we wanted to raise deer population. But we found if you have the big purple top turnips and green globes and they're a high percentage, think of all those softball size holes in the ground. They're not growing clover the following year because there's no seed that fell there.
Right.
But when they rot during the summer, what do grow in that area because it's a big enough hole? Weeds. So you can actually spread out your clover, have holes where there's no clover because of all the big bulbs, and then weeds grow in their place during the middle of the summer. So then you take the high, 3/4 of your big bulbs out in a blend where you mix the two. So we figured that out a long time ago. And so for me, it was like kid in a candy store to have my own seed blends that I could actually make and put together. So almost all of our seed blends this year changed from last year, meaning just by tweaking this percentage, you're always chasing perfection. You never find perfection. You're just always trying to improve. And if you're never changing every year, then you don't improve. And so that's the idea with the seeds is just take that experience and all the experience with all our clients we work with and the recommendations. That's one of the questions when you go to client properties is, well, what's your experience with food plots?
Right.
What's worked for you in the food plots? Well, we do that a lot. And so you see the same common answers over and over again based on their type of equipment, deer herds. And then you try to infuse all that experience into the blend. So now we have 19 different seed offerings, but that also includes, we have some cold hardy oats, peas, rye, and buckwheat, and then the rest are blends. So the clover, we want uncoated seed, but we want a variety of clover. And then I love bird's foot trefoil, love chicory. Chicory is only 3 pounds per acre. So people say, why buy a blend? Well, a lot of people, they'll buy a pound of this, a pound of that, pound of that, pound of that for a brassica blend. Well, you don't realize that a full boat planting of tillage radish is 15 pounds per acre. A full boat planting of purple top turnip is 3 pounds per acre. So literally 1 pound of turnip, purple top turnip, equals 5 or 3 pounds of tillage radish.
Right.
So you can't just go pound for pound for pound. And that's where the mixes come in. You have to know what to blend so you're not overplanting, especially when it comes to brassica. That's what a company does for you. You should be able to know this stuff and figure it out. The chicory I used in the UP. Even in the UP, they didn't eat it that much, but it was a great nurse crop to the clover. So you have half a field with chicory, half without chicory. The half with the clover was double the volume and green. And the half without was yellowish and being drought starved during the summertime. The chicory is a great nurse crop, but chicory is 3 pounds per acre. So you don't want to plant 2 pounds of chicory in the mix.
Right.
And that 2/3 of the acre
dominate the whole plot.
Yeah. So I found that 0.75%, 0.75 of a pound or 0.75 of a pound is about right per acre. So we put all that experience into our blends. You tweak them because different seed varieties come out. You try to experiment with them. We're experimenting with some things right now, but we have like the clover. Biggest crop failure I see, other than beans getting eaten to the ground on small plots in a wooded section, an acre of beans, up north is probably not going to do
dead.
But clover planted in the spring, almost every summer you get some kind of drought, and clover on lighter soil is going to be gone. And so you can have something look great in May, and then by the end of July, it's fizzled down to nothing and it's completely dead. That's spring planted clover. But if you plant it in the fall with a cool season annual, you get the benefit of the cool season annual, and then you get the carryover the clover the following year. You get a great shot of increasing moisture in the fall, winter dormancy, and then you get another shot of great moisture in the spring. So then that clover lasts. But people insist on planting in the spring. So we have annual rye that we plant, that we have a mix for, we call it our spring perennial drought attack. And it's for those people that insist on planting clover in the spring. Then we want them to at least have a chance. Have you guys seen, I'm sure you've seen, like when they plant alfalfa, very expensive. When the farmers are planting it Roundup ready, then they're putting in it with the oat cover crop. That oat cover crop, that alfalfa is very susceptible, even though it's drought tolerant. When it's young, it's very susceptible to being droughted out. So that those oats are critical, and that's what you should be doing in the spring too. So we have that mix, we have our fall mix, the perennial mix, and then we have a summer soil builder. A lot of times people put 15 seeds into a summer soil builder, but let's say half of those seeds get eaten by deer. They go through and pick them all out, so there's nothing there. A third of them don't grow because it's poor soil or poor fix. Then you're left with a lot of open soil exposed. You get a lot of weeds in. And it really, each one contributes differently to the field, but only in that area where it's growing. So if half of them are eaten out, you're really not improving the soil. And that's where, like, if someone wants to leave that summer soil improver, we only have 4 seeds in there. If someone wants to leave that and they don't know when they're coming back to replant in the fall, like 2.5 months, 3 months, then that's a great improvement for the soil, but it's giving you a full canopy of growth, and it's supposed to shade the ground, limit weeds, build the soil, and it's not portions of it dying and being open. But really, if you have the timing down, like 7 weeks, 8 weeks, buckwheat is better. Buckwheat's not a proprietary blend. We can't sell it as such. There's nothing special about buckwheat. And we don't make much money by pushing buckwheat over our summer soil builder.
Yeah.
But buckwheat has a timing issue. You don't want it to be 6 feet tall and have it grow all the way to maturity in some cases. So we're not going to offer products that just sound good on paper, like a really good soil improver for the summer that doesn't actually improve soil. Buckwheat's the best. It's smother crop. It has a greenhouse effect against the soil. The root system is expansive and builds the soil. Around here where it's really critical to avoid erosion. So a lot of these blends, it's not just we're selling a clover blend. It's a clover blend with the right amount of chicory, bird's foot trefoil, 4 different types of clover, alfalfa in it. Does it make sense that alfalfa and the bird's foot trefoil kind of cancel each other out?
Yeah.
If it's drier soil, the alfalfa is going to do well. If it's wetter soil, the bird's foot. In the perfect soil, they'll both do well. You just have to diversify. So there's a method to the madness that goes back decades into those seed blends. We try to improve them every year, and we're not going to sell junk. And some of the trends in brassica, we're not going to kale, for example. Kale, I have lots of video on my phone from clients where a brassica blend will have kale in it. Well, deer don't like kale very much. If it's an area where high deer density and high browse pressure, then they'll eat the kale.
Humans don't like it either. They just pretend to.
Nick puts it in his little ninja smoothie, though.
The spinach.
It gives you a lot of gas. But anyways,
that's what
explains the flatulence.
Yeah.
we had kale in a mix that we used 3 years ago or 3 seasons ago, and I was not very happy that it was in the mix. And by December, we were running the side-by-side through the fields to make shooting lanes from the blinds, because it comes up with a finger-size diameter stalk that's there all the way to spring. It's stiff enough that it doesn't blow over. And it could cause a deflection by muzzleloader sabot when we're hunting. So we're clearing shooting lanes through it. They don't eat it, but it looks really good. Gives you tons of volume, and it looks like the best plot you've ever planted, and then the deer don't eat it. And so it's really appropriate. We have a Big Woods blend. So the Big Woods blend, there's no other complementary food sources in the area, or where you have super high deer numbers, then kale is a good product because it produces a lot of volume. A lot of people don't know the difference of why you'd use kale one place and not the other. So our traditional Big Boost Brassica blend does not have kale in it, but our Big Woods Brassica has kale in it because we want to produce volume in an area where it's heavy browse pressure for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of going back to what we would recommend in one area versus another, like in a big woods setting, I might recommend the Big Woods Brassica because it has a high percentage of kale, but I wouldn't recommend our Big Boost Brassica.
Yeah,
because
makes sense.
It's going to get eaten down to the ground. Has more tilled radish in it, which they like early. It's more attractive. So bottom line is there's a lot that goes into every blend, and it's been really successful. People like it. We try to offer good customer service. We have Wes, our full-time employee. He's a farmer, food plotter, hunter, and he answers all questions, email, and phone calls. And so we really try to put a lot of effort into the customer service and then the background experience and kind of evolving of the seeds too.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to try some of them this year. I know we have in years past too.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, the clover thing is funny. For whatever reason, I don't know what we even planted and what were we thinking?
It's a lot of annuals. I think that the clover thing was always kind of the back and forth of like, it never looks like it's producing a lot of tonnage, right? Which is kind of what the attraction is in that fall annual standpoint, whether it's a brassica or whatever, cereal grains, the thickness and the quick success. I think if anything, what clover and some alfalfa that I've got in has done is it's given me back some time to work on other farms.
Well, that's when I said earlier, whether that was this morning or today, I said I feel like ahead this year. That's why.
Because there's clover in.
I got clover in, and I established it all last year. Mm-hmm. And so I drive around this year. I'm like, put a little more seed down, a little more cleth, and we're in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I am that guy. Like I realize you can overdo it as far as seed and stuff, but like I don't leave the house there without a bag seeder and some extra clover seed, maybe some, cloth, and I'll check it out. And I'm always putting extra seed down in the clover. I'm like, we're keep piling
it going, layer it in.
I layer it in.
Well, I look at like clover produces its tonnage over 5 months.
Yeah, exactly.
Brassica produces its tonnage over 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's really different. It's that same amount of volume. It's just spread out. Alfalfa gets frosted out after the first frost. It turns yellow, stemmy, dormant, and gets cut in half. So I rarely, like alfalfa would be a recommendation out in a farm in Montana where it's out southwest and they're irrigating fields because of the dry soil. Alfalfa is a great fit out there. And it'll last fairly. I've never been out to the Milk River area, but I've heard of those areas.
That's where
they're all alfalfa and really pretty. So it's not to say I would never recommend alfalfa, but and the clover kind of goes back to one of the questions we have with our clients is when it comes to food plots is, okay, you have this much money, you have, you can spend whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
You have this equipment. Now, how much time do you have?
Yeah.
And so it might be that someone has the money and the equipment to plant better high volume crops every single year for their fall food plots, but they do not have the time.
Yeah.
And so they have the time to go out and mow their clover and spray it with clethodim in the spring and take care of it. But that's the time they have. So that's part of a recommendation for seed too.
Mm. Well,
clover, I don't want all clover here because we're going to create that dough problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're going to have too many does.
I've got the clover and alfalfa where I need the deer. Like in Kentucky, that alfalfa is there because we won't get our first frost till late October. Maybe in early November,
and we like them.
Yeah,
we like them in conjunction with each other, right? So like,
I've got clover in my alfalfa because it's not a pure like harvestable alfalfa field. So I've got clover in it, and I'll treat it with clethodim. And
I think in those September and even into October months for some of our Midwestern, central stuff. So we'll go 50-50. Like we'll take your clover seed and mix it with alfalfa, and from an attraction standpoint, but definitely from like a drought resistance standpoint. Like I think that
because that alfalfa goes deeper.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll do better in a drought condition. Mm-hmm.
And that's where the chicory comes in, but the chicory is not as attractive as alfalfa.
I did more chicory. I've got two of the new plots I put in on the ridge in Ohio were both about 0.6, give or take. And I did clover and chicory in both of those plots here this spring, just because I figure they're going to get a little bit more pressure than some of the bigger plots. So I wanted more tonnage, and I added chicory in there.
Do you use iMox to manage your clover and chicory plots?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Have you heard of that? You guys know what that is.
Clethodim and Buterac is what I use.
Brackets had told me about that. He's like, yeah, you can use iMox to kill.
What is it?
It'll kill anything, I think, except clover and chicory.
And alfalfa, I would assume.
I don't know.
They're all in the same
for
family.
sure. Clover and chicory
should be legume type stuff. That
yeah, but I do know there's a residual effect with brassica, so you wouldn't spray it on.
Yeah, I don't know. I use Clethodim and Buterac 200 or 24DB.
Yeah,
that's my mix.
I don't even use the Buterac that much. I use
broadleafs.
I use cleth and I'll mow.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it seems like in most cases, because if you're mowing, that keeps the broadleaves.
Yeah, you don't need Buterac at that point.
Where the Clethodim is real important because the grasses are really smothering, especially foxtail, something like that.
Yeah. I will let I've got a cattle farmer and next to me in Kentucky, and I'm gonna let him come in probably, mid-May sometime to do a cutting on my alfalfa just to knock it back, so that it's not just long and stemmy the whole season.
Sure.
So
cool.
Yeah. Cool, Jeff. Well, we appreciate it, man. As always, dropping knowledge on us and just having a good conversation of what I think a lot of people are kind of thinking about and going through right now in the whitetail world.
Yeah, I was getting excited. We've had some dry ground lately. We had snow, a week and a half ago around Easter, right after Easter, and we've had dry, and it was to the point where we could start driving out in the fields pretty easy and not kicking up a bunch of mud. And it's been pouring rain. I can hear out since we've had this podcast.
Here too.
Yeah.
Let's look at the radar right now, and it's still, there's a big patch over us.
It's been hammering.
It hasn't stopped raining in like 2 weeks.
Yeah,
here.
we got like the entire April rain, like the first week of April,
which I'm grateful for. Let's do this.
We're so dry. Yeah, it's really bad. So
yeah, well, we can see in your videos. Yeah, how bad it's been. It's a 100% chance of rain. Oh my word. Yeah, it's still raining through tomorrow night.
And rain.
So last thing here, and we'll wrap up. Jeff, we talked about this big, on my farm there's big sections of old pasture stuff that we were debating on what to do.
Yeah.
And so if you remember, whatever it was, last year it would have been the year before, we sprayed in October for grasses. So we sprayed with Glide, tried to kill all the fescue out of it, all the grass. And because all the broadleafs have gone dormant by that point, that was a recommendation that Craig Harper made. And then we went and burned it in February. And I don't know if I told you or if we've talked since then, but it exploded. I mean, last year I had a bunch of stuff that was 6 or 7 foot tall. And so right now, what it looks like is a lot of that tall super semi stuff is like dead, right? It died. And there's a lot of more legume looking stuff, a lot of clover in there, a lot of more broadleafs that I'm used to seeing coming up in there. So I don't know, it's maybe like this tall right now, but it has that tall stemmy dead stuff in it. So, I mean, there's still like a lot of structure there.
Right.
So I'm really curious to see if that was like a pseudo explosion of habitat last year, or like what will come back into it this year. I'm pretty anxious to see.
Interesting to see. The one good thing is you guys killed out that grass in the fall,
definitely,
before you burned in the spring, because a lot of people do not, and they just get more grass.
Right.
You don't get more of those bad cool season grasses that don't add any value at all.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if you see that value extend for several years.
I hope so.
You're in a location too. We're up by us. If we do that, the heavy snows knock it down, and you have no cover all winter. So different where you guys are.
We have not. I mean,
blew my mind that. I mean, right now I walk out there today. There's 6-7 foot tall stuff. I walked through it. We found 4 sheds in it. Actually, I guess John Beadnell found 4 sheds in it. Dad let him walk it.
Oh yeah, how about that?
I was like, he found them where? He's like, on our stuff. I was like, on our stuff. So anyways, yeah, he said, which is fine, whatever. Yeah. Found 4 sheds
but
in
it's
there.
Like goldenrod. I don't know what else is coming up in there.
I don't know what the super tall stuff is, like, but it's sporadic. There's patches of all kind of different stuff, which is what I want. I just wanted like early successional anything but old fescue pasture.
I think you'll start to develop more like woody browse and stuff in that over the next couple of years. You know, so briars and stuff, and which is what you want. Yep.
Wow. And I've got a hunch that if we get Jeff out there, he'll tell me that a portion of that should turn into a food source.
I think I would also wonder about going in and killing out some swaths of for switch, like just having some like switch embedded in there, just creating edge.
Okay.
The switch is nice for just the total screening, because anything else, if it's not solid, then can the deer see you from 50 yards in or 100 or 20? The switch makes it so they can't see when they're 10 feet in. So that's the one thing about it. Out here, like I told you guys earlier, we have like 3 miles of switch. And so whether it's 100 feet wide or 10 feet wide, think about pheasant, you know, they want to run lengthwise. You know, they're not running in circles to get away. They run like crazy. Those that fly out. So you want them to be able to run. You want them to have that cover. But then that edge of switch and hardwood regen, great turkey nesting habitat. And what we found last year, we watched the poult dive right into the switchgrass. Kind of like mice. Just, it's amazing how they can run right in there, and I don't know where they go, but they just dive right in,
bury themselves in there.
And
well, what I love about
we have pheasant hunt, we have a lot of pheasants out here now too, and they all use that.
That's a big selling point for my dad when I tell him, hey, we're going to convert a bunch of this stuff to CRP. The fact that we could hold birds is a big appeal for him. Yeah. One thing I have a client property down there I've been to 3 times now. Now I'm trying to think of exactly where it's at, south of Columbus. Okay.
But they have lots of pheasant on their property.
Cool.
I mean, sure, they have dozens of roosters on 200 and some acres.
Well, we'll stock it. I mean, if I feel like we have the habitat to support it, I'll put whatever.
Yep.
A bunch of birds out there, and I think they'll survive if they have the habitat.
Be the rut. Your dad's just going to be coming through with dogs blowing.
That'd be great. I'll send my dogs up. He can watch my dogs for a week, and by all means. What I was going to say is I really like what I like about a combination of like switch and early successional type bedding areas is that you know, almost like a mowed corn, you know, how guys will mow or do like designing a food plot in a way that's like orients and puts edge in a certain way. It seems like you can do that with switch within the early successional stuff. So the whole thing is bedding essentially, but now I have like a line of switch and it's all leading
creating that edge
to a stand location where I want them to pop out at this specific spot.
Yeah. Then there's, I mean, every tunnel we found too, if you are mowing through switch, like if you mow 4 feet wide, then the switch will lean over like this with all the moisture and
like
snow.
A tunnel.
Yeah, and so it's a tunnel, but it covers it up. So if you want to access a stand through it, or you want deer to move through it, you need to go about 8 feet wide. Even if you go 6 feet wide for mowing, that'll leave about 2 feet in the middle for deer to travel through. But if you only go 4 feet wide, we have a 4-foot brush hog on the back of a tractor, so it's one single pass is not enough.
That's one thing I desperately need. The only mower that we have is
that big bat
it's
wing.
Like a 15-foot bat wing. So all of our trails are like
drive.
We have a tractor that's we have it just for brush hogging. We use a PTO mounted broadcaster on it too.
Yeah,
that's primarily what we use it for. But and on all our trails too. So brush hogging, switchgrass, all our trails, miles of trails. We use it a lot.
Critical.
Awesome.
Cool, man. Well, we appreciate it, buddy, and glad that Mama Bear and Lily are doing well. And
doing great. Yeah, and Jackson's adjusting.
Yeah, I bet. Now no longer the baby of the family.
No, and his birthday was Saturday, and then Lily was born on Easter Sunday the next day. So Jen went in on his birthday.
Well, you'll have Canadian fishing with him in sight here pretty soon.
Very much so. I can't wait. Yeah, we were just talking calendar this morning about when we're going to Michigan to see family and show off little baby Lily, and then get up to Canada. And I had Jesse asked me if I wanted to fit another client in May, and I said nope.
It's fishing. Okay. I'll be fishing.
So end of May, we have 4 clients. End of May, it was supposed to be I wasn't supposed to have any, but it's hard to say no. And then June's a full boat.
Wow.
June, July, August, and then Jen and I actually get married September 7th.
Oh, so, wow. Very cool, man.
Yeah, we're going on a honeymoon after that. And
love that.
probably a warm weather place in March or April, but we'll go hunting.
There you go. Yeah, the 7th. Is that right around Labor Day this year?
We'll be clinking a beer, maybe over some mule deer.
Yeah, we'll be in North Dakota muley hunting.
We're trying to plan a group trip with Nick and Allie, and
nice,
and Bo and Johnny too. I don't know if we'll all get drawn, but that's what we're trying for.
Nice. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Good people.
Yeah. Well, cool, buddy. Well, we'll let you go, man. We appreciate it as always.
Yeah, I always enjoy talking to you guys.
So, I mean, just in that mindset, man. Work.
Locking it in. I'm finally feeling like honed in on the Sturgis lot. Like I'm understanding the pieces are aligning.
Yeah, the movement thing is like that's the hardest thing I think to come by because it's always been where is he betting, where is he going?
Well, dude, you know what's really cool? I'm sorry to interrupt your thought.
No, you're fine.
You know what's really cool? We have the unique, fortunate, position here to be able to talk to. We talk to Higgins. We talk to Sturgis. We talk to your drumming log, your brackets, your anybody your Lukowskis. Anybody who's like, whether they're getting paid for it or just like on their own farm, have a prescription for this stuff, and and then we get to afterward talk about it, and we're like, okay, so here's how this guy's doing this. I get it. Here's the common variables, and it's like,
well, that's what I think is the unique thing is like everybody, like nobody's wrong. What Jeff's saying, what Higgins is saying, what Lukowski, what Brackett, none of them are wrong. They all have different styles on it, which is cool because we get to take that in the melting pot.
Yeah,
and be like, all right, like I see what he's saying, but what if we did this because that's what they do and adapt it.
And while there are, you could call it egos, but like this guy should hold themselves in high esteem. Jeff said they get paid to be right, but I think they enjoy some pushback. So like we can talk to Jeff and say, well, Higgins does this, he says this or that, or Brackett said this or this. What do you think? And it's funny. It's fun to see their gears turning because they're like, I want to disagree with that guy because I don't like him, but he's right about this or that. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's cool, and Jeff's obviously one of the best in that he like just about the bean discussion.
1,600 properties he's been on.
Well, that's it, man. I mean, it comes down to like you've been on that many properties. When you get on one, you just know what needs to happen. You're just experienced enough to know what needs to happen by trial and error.
You've seen it before, and some of those properties date back to like 20 years, so it's like, hey, crazy. I prescribed something, it either worked or it didn't. The time has passed to allow for assessment.
So it'll be cool. We're excited because we've been using what was his WHS blends now with the pure wildlife blend. So excited to get some of the seed in the ground. We've already have some actually in the ground, and just continue to work on that. Obviously, we love Jeff and Jen; they're awesome. So it'll be cool to have that relationship, and I'm sure at some point we'll
honestly settles my anxiety a bit to know that he's willing to come out when I have this big CRP thing possibly coming out. Like that's bigger than me. I don't have
the giant. Yeah. Because you don't want to make a mistake and take things out when you don't need to.
Well, it's in 10 years then at that point. Yeah, it's like you done did it.
You're locked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and per like some of our comments, we were talking to people, some of those states you can't take 10%
right
in the field. So
Ohio you can. I did.
Just making sure.
What's the other thing that Lee said? The S or RSP?
CSP?
CSP.
N?
We don't know what the S stands for.
CSP.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
Not CRP, but CSP.
Yep.
It's one after R.
Mm-hmm.
Except after C.
But in this case, after C. Okay. Anyways, we appreciate Jeff coming on. His first I Bought a Farm. Been on the HUNTR Podcast before.
Yeah, we'll keep them coming. We got a couple cool ones lined up too. I think we got some agronomists coming down the line here. Mm-hmm. Maybe dig into some further analogic stuff. I think it's pretty applicable for baseline farm herd health. And some cool stuff happening with our farm in Illinois. And
we're keeping it.
Well, for now, we're keeping it.
We're keeping it.
Funny enough, in the past 2 days, I've had several people write. Somebody I didn't even tell you about. Somebody wrote us. They're like, "I guess get a Kansas Farms for you." And I'm like, "Well,
skip road." That's what I was like.
I know.
I mean, still send them, but
still obviously send it. Yeah, obviously send it.
Let me see what you got.
Don't even ask, just bring it.
Yeah. So, but anyways, we appreciate Jeff coming on, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Later.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode of the I Bought a Farm podcast, make sure you check it out every other Thursday night on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and any other place that you might find your favorite podcast.